Romantic Tales. Chapter 566. Yili raised her head to look at the man in white on the city wall. Her lips slowly curved into a faint smile. She raised her right hand slightly. Her soft voice spread across the entire battlefield. Attack? On the city gate tower, Mo Xiuyao looked helplessly at the army that was preparing to attack the city. Yuan Pei, who was standing at the side, couldn't help but laugh. He looked at Mo Xiuyao with a smile and said, "Your Highness, it seems that this battle isn't over yet." Mo Xiuyao smiled bitterly. "Old General is right. I celebrated too early. According to the rules of the drill would end when the city was breached. They had won. But since it was a drill, they had to train the new soldiers as much as possible. Furthermore, there was no rule on the battlefield that said a city couldn't be taken back after it was breached. As a result, the curtain was raised on a large-scale siege battle once again. This time, the siege was even more difficult than Mo Xiuyao's previous siege. The two sides fought for 7 days without a victor being decided. In the end, they could only announce a draw. This was because Mo Xiuyao's city had no more rations. This was a completely isolated city. Even though there were no civilians who needed extra rations, it also meant that there was no other food in the city other than the rations they brought with them. As for Yuan Pei, he had already destroyed the food that originally belonged to the defenders on the day the city was breached. Not only did Mo Xiuyao's subordinates suffer heavy losses, they even had no food to eat and could only defend the city with empty stomachs. The soldiers outside the city weren't doing any better. In a moment of carelessness, Mo Xiuyao's men destroyed most of their rations. In the end, neither side was willing to admit defeat. Seeing that they were about to run out of energy, Old General Yuan Pei could only call for a halt. In the end, the two sides agreed to a draw. When Prince Ding and Princess Ding announced the end of the drill, many soldiers couldn't help but cry tears of joy. Of course, this wasn't because they thought they had won. It was because they could finally eat. Obviously, there was a large amount of food and fodder piled up outside the city, but they had to watch their dead brothers eat and drink well while lying to themselves that they had run out of food. These days were 10 times, 100 times worse than when they ran out of food. As soon as the drill was over, no one cared about anything else. They set up camp on the spot, buried pots and cooked rice. The soldiers who had been fighting fiercely just now were all on good terms with each other. Especially when he saw that the other party's eyes were also green from hunger, a special kind of comrade in arms spontaneously arose in his heart. In the small city, the generals who had just finished eating and drinking also gathered together. Because the siege had lasted for too long, even Lu Jingxian, who had already returned, came back to watch the battle. Now that the battle was over, both sides had their own victories and defeats. No one had lost face, so the atmosphere was still harmonious. But the young generals of the Eastern Army that had been with Yili looked at Yili, who was still dressed in white, and their eyes were still dazed. A few days ago they had been so busy with the battle that they didn't have the mind to care. Now that the battle was over, the young men finally remembered that the white-clothed young master that they had intentionally or unintentionally pushed aside and made them promise General Lu was the Wang Fei that they had always respected. This strong impact made the group of young men feel uncomfortable. Wang Fei. The young men pushed each other and finally pushed out an unlucky person. Wang Fei. This subordinate was blind before and offended Wang Fei. "Wang Fei, please punish us." Zhang Qilan glanced at the incompetent juniors and said, "You brats still have the face to say this? This old man had repeatedly told you to be polite to Wang Fei. What did you do?" Everyone stared at him silently. "You were talking about Mr. Chu and not Wang Fei?" Seeing the aggrieved gazes of the young people, Zhang Qilan was silent. He snickered and looked at Yili, saying, "That Wang Fei." This subordinate did not explain this to them clearly. "Wang Fei, please do not take offense." Yili smiled faintly and said, "General Zhang is too serious. This was originally my intention. Also, it is hard for young people to not be young and impetuous. General Zhang and the other generals have taught well. These young generals are all good seedlings." Being praised by Wang Fei, everyone felt their lips twitch. They were young, but compared to Wang Fei, who was just 21 or 22 years old, most of them were older. Being called young and impetuous by Wang Fei, they couldn't help but blush. On the side, Yunting was complaining inside. "What are you all doing? When you met Wang Fei was only 15 or 16 years old. With Yi Li's praise, the other generals also revealed smiles on their faces. Even though these young people were following Zhang Qilon this time, they were not all Zhang Qilon's subordinates. Among them were Lu Jingxi and Yuan Pei, and even Sun Yan's subordinates who were stationed at Feihong Pass. They were all elites of the young generation. When they were praised as their superiors, the generals felt they had face. Hearing Wang Fei say that she would not blame them, the young people all sighed in relief. The young people were very curious. Even though they were far away, they thought that they were secretly examining Wang Fei. After all, they had heard of Princess Ding's deeds before they had entered the Mahist army. After the war between Nanzhao and the Xiling begins, issue a conscription order in the northwest. Feng Xiao agreed. Su Qingchen received Mo Xiaoyao's gaze and shook her head. I don't understand military matters. You guys do as you see fit. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said to Feng Xiao, go prepare. After the Prince Ding mansion took control of the northwest, the conscription system had been reformed many times. It was somewhat different from the current military service system. All youths in the northwest who had reached the age of 18 had to serve 2 years of military service. After 2 years they would be stripped of their armor and returned to the fields. But after that they still had to undergo military training for a month every year. Most importantly, these 2 years of military service were not limited to ordinary people. Merchants and even scholars had to participate. But scholars could reduce it to 1 year. So now, all the students of Lishan Academy who had reached the age of 18 had already served military service. In addition, the Mahist army had a standing army of 900,000. The soldiers in these armies had all served for more than 5 years, and all of them would serve for 30 years or even longer. They were the true fighting force of the Northwest. Also, they were different from the 2-year conscripts who had no pay and were different from most of the soldiers of other countries who had no pay. They received a certain amount of pay every month and a certain amount of pension if they died in battle. Although the Prince Ding mansion created a certain amount of financial pressure, it also fought for the Mahist army's fighting strength and cohesion. Compared to the millions of soldiers of the other 3 countries, the Mahist army's 900,000 soldiers were not enough. But once a war really broke out and the conscription order was issued, the Prince Ding mansion could instantly organize an army of over 1 million properly trained soldiers. Although their fighting strength could not compare to the real Mahist army, it was definitely not something that some soldiers who had just been pulled into the army and entered the battlefield could compare to. At the very least, they had been trained by the generals of the real Mahist army. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao's departing figure, Feng Xiao sighed and looked up at the sky. Once Nanzhao and Xiling went to war, the northern tribes would definitely get a share of the Dechu state. And the Prince Ding mansion would definitely not be able to stay out of this. After so many years of preparation, was it finally about to begin? Chapter 567. War wasn't something that could be started immediately. Although there were signs of war outside the Northwest region, the people in the Northwest region were still living their lives peacefully and warmly. Because they believed that no matter what happened, as long as the Mahist army was there, the flames of war would not ignite in their homeland. As for the officials and generals in the Prince Ding mansion, they were well aware that the peace in front of them would not last for long. They all secretly rubbed their palms together in preparation. In the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaoyao did not seem to be worried about the situation outside. After the military exercise ended, he rewarded the soldiers who deserved to be rewarded and threw the people who needed to be fixed elsewhere. Then he returned to the Prince Ding mansion to be a peaceful prince. Every day, other than dealing with political matters, he would pester Yi Li to bully Mo Xiaobao. He was extremely carefree. Today, Mo Xiaobao, who had been given a rare day off by Mr. Qingyun, was once again bullied by his unscrupulous father. His eyes were wet as he looked at his mother with grievance. Yi Li could not help but sigh helplessly. This father and son seemed to be unable to interact peacefully for more than 2 hours. Mo Xiaobao was still young and did not have enough fighting strength. He could only be bullied without any strength to retaliate. If it was a normal person, they would probably stay as far away as possible from Mo Xiaoyao. However, Mo Xiaobao had to face difficulties. When there were no difficulties, he would create difficulties for himself. He was defeated time and time again. Seeing Mo Xiaobao pretending to be pitiful, the unscrupulous father sitting on the couch snorted in disdain. Pretending to be pitiful? Those were all leftovers from I. Of course, Prince Ding would never admit that at that time because compared to Emo Xiaobao's round, white, tender and innocent appearance, the effect of him pretending to be pitiful was greatly reduced. Furthermore, was it appropriate for a father to compete with his son in pretending to be pitiful? It was too undignified. Thus, Prince Ding firmly rejected this option. Speaking of which, Prince as a father, it wasn't appropriate for him to bully a 5-year-old child just because he was older than his son, right? As for what happened afterwards, Emo Shuyao learned the art of acting pitiful on his own. In the end, he evolved into a little white cat who pretended to be a pig to eat a tiger. He looked pure on the outside, but he was incomparably scheming on the inside. This really made Emo Shuyao's stomach ache for a while. This was not something he could have predicted. Yili bent over and picked up her tearful son. She gently rubbed his little head and said, "Be good, Xiaobao. Mother will take you out to play. Let's not play with father anymore." Emo Xiaobao immediately reaches out his hands to hug Yili's neck, his smile incomparably brilliant. "Nyangqin is the best. Xiaobao loves Nyangqin the most." Yili was speechless. She knew that this brat was just pretending. However, not many people could stand that pitiful look even if it was just an act. Sometimes Yili couldn't help but think, in the end, who did this child's temperament resemble? She and Emo Shuyao were not people who would reveal their emotions in front of others. Although Emo Shuyao loved to put on an act from time to time, Yili bet that when Emo Shuyao was a child he definitely didn't reach the stage where he could cry whenever he wanted to. If this lively temperament was somewhat similar to Su Qingyan, but when Su Qingyan was 5 years old, his mind might not even be as sharp as Emo Xiaobao's little finger. "Xiaobao, come down. Father has something to say to you." On the soft couch, Missouri Shuyao slightly squints his eyes, smiling incomparably amiably as he beckons to Emo Xiaobao. Emo Xiaobao's intuition was not good. He tightly hugs Yili's neck and repeatedly shakes his head. He simply buries his little face into Yili's neck. Emo Shuyao didn't get angry. He chuckles and says, "You really don't want to listen? You won't regret it? If you regret it in the future, don't say that this father doesn't love you and didn't remind you." Emo Xiaobao secretly perks up his ears. Incomparably conflicted, he secretly turns his head to look at Emo Shuyao, who is still lying on the soft couch with his eyes closed. He only hears Emo Shuyao mutter to himself, "Speaking of which, in the past your father I almost grew up to look like Zhang Qilon. If it wasn't for your grandfather, my father, who reminded me, our Prince Ding mansion's handsome appearance would have been cut off." Emo Xiaobao's face pales. Grow up to look like General Zhang. Zhang Qilon's appearance appeared in his mind. Emo Xiaobao repeatedly shakes his head to dispel this frightening image. It wasn't that Zhang Qilon's appearance was unpresentable. General Zhang's facial features were good and his figure was tall and imposing. No matter where he was placed, he would not be able to escape the praise of having a dignified appearance. But Emo Xiaobao's requirements for himself were exceptionally high. Even if he couldn't grow up to look like eldest uncle, there was still Feng San Han Mingxi or his father to choose from. General Zhang's appearance really didn't fit Emo Xiaobao classmates' aesthetic standards. Thus, for the sake of his future beauty, Emo Xiaobao kicks his little feet to make Yili put him down. He stands vigilantly in front of Emo Shuyao. After waiting for a while, Emo Shuyao lazily opens his eyes. He glances at Emo Xiaobao from the corner of his eyes for a long while before slowly reaching out to pinch Emo Xiaobao's round little face. Pinch. 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 Emo Xiaobao angrily glares at his father and whimpers. Although it doesn't hurt too much, it means that he once again lost to this man in front of his mother. Emo Shuyao sits up and moves closer to Emo Xiaobao to carefully examine the little face that is red from his pinch. He gives a sinister smile. "Do you know that you are very fat? You still dare to ask your mother to hug you. There will be a day when your mother will be tired out by a little fatty like you. Look at how chubby you are, you still dare to eat meat every day. Your father, I was not even half as fat as you when I was 5 years old. Tell me, when you grow up, will you be even fatter than Zhang Qilon? I think you don't need to be called Emo Xiaobao anymore. How about changing your name to Emo de Fatty?" Hearing this, Emo Xiaobao lowers his head to look at his round, white and tender little hands. His fragile little heart is finally shattered by his own imagination. He looks at Emo Shuyao with grief and indignation before running away in tears. "Ooh. Eldest uncle, father bullies me, Shuyao." Yili frowns, indifferently looking at the man who is lying on the soft couch laughing to the point of convulsing back and forth. How can you talk to a child like that? It's easy to hurt a child's self-esteem. Moreover, Emo Xiaobao is not as exaggerated as he says. It's just that his grandfather Qin Yun, who loves him dearly, raised him too well. He looks slightly stronger than other children. It's a good thing for children to be a little chubbier. Emo Xiaoyao humps. I'm doing it for his own good. It's about time for him to officially start practicing martial arts. If he grows too fat, the one suffering is himself. When he comes back in the future, Li will make more vegetarian dishes. Yili face palms. After all is said and done, it's still because she personally made all the meat dishes that her son likes last night. She slightly neglected a certain someone who told Emo Xiaobao to not be happy without meat, while Emo Xiaoyao prefers vegetarian dishes. When Xiaobao comes back to the academy, I'll personally make your favorite dishes, okay? Yili says. Compared to those wives who wash their hands and make soup for their husbands, Yili rarely cooks. Emo Xiaoyao nods in satisfaction and says, only for me? Yili nods and warns, you're not allowed to bully Xiaobao. Emo Xiaoyao waves his hand and says, don't worry, that brat's zodiac sign is a cockroach. After a while he'll happily run back by himself. Yili is speechless. Her watery eyes flashed with a trace of sharpness. She reaches out and pinches his waist. Meeting Emo Xiaoyao's puzzled gaze, Yili smiles sinisterly. If Xiaobao's zodiac sign is a cockroach, then what's your zodiac sign? Chapter 568. Sure enough, in less than half an hour, student Emo Xiaobao happily appears in front of Yili, bashfully looking at Yili. He wants to say something but hesitates. Yili holds back her laughter, looking at her son, and asks, what does Xiaobao want to say? Emo Xiaobao shyly says, Uncle said, even if Xiaobao really grows up to be like General Zhang, even if the whole world dislikes Xiaobao, mother will not dislike Xiaobao? Yili secretly glares at Emo Xiaoyao and says with a smile, of course, no matter what Xiaobao becomes, he will always be mother's darling. In this world, there is no mother who will dislike her own child. Emo Xiaobao's eyes light up, firmly nodding his head. Child knows child. Child won't eat meat in the future. Yili touches her son's little face and says, of course you still have to eat meat, but you still have to eat some meat and vegetables. You can't be picky like yesterday, do you understand? Child knows. Then. Student Xiaobao is shy. Can mother still hug Xiaobao? Emo Xiaoyao has a toothache. In the end, who did this scoundrel learn from? From ancient times until now, his Prince Ding mansion has never had such a strange breed. Was that bashful look really acceptable? Zhu Qingchen. It's definitely him who taught Emo Xiaobao bad things. You just wait for me. Yili smiles. Of course you can. Emo Xiaobao solemnly nods his head. Xiaobao has grown up. I don't need mother to hug me. Xiaobao can hug mother. But right now Xiaobao is still small. Let mother hug. He is really too considerate and filial. Yili's heart is as soft as the clouds in the sky. She bends over and hugs Emo Xiaobao to sit on her lap, lowering her head to kiss him. Mother will remember Xiaobao's words. Originally she said she would take Emo Xiaobao out to play, but behind them, there is a Prince Ding who doesn't do his job and wants to follow them in the name of protecting his wife and child. In the carriage, Emo Xiaobao lies on his mother's lap, representing his uncle to despise his father. Emo Xiaoyao didn't mind at all. He raised his eyebrows and laughed. Kid, what do you know? This was called making the best use of people and things. Could also be said that he knew how to make good use of people. Since your uncle and uncle are so powerful, why should I work myself to death to deal with those chores? I, your father, am the most powerful person in the Northwest. I only need to set a direction and goal. Naturally, there will be countless people working hard to achieve this goal. Slacking off. Uncle said that an emperor who is lazy and ignores the affairs of the court is an incapable ruler. Therefore, a prince who is lazy and ignores the affairs of the court is also an incapable ruler. The little white bun sat on Yili's knees and seriously discussed the issue of diligent government. Please say that I have managed my subordinates well, thank you, Emo Xiaoyao said lazily, looking at his son who was trying to argue with reason. Silly boy, you don't even know that you've been tricked by your uncle. He's clearly afraid that you'll be like your father and not do anything when you grow up and implicate him. However, your father won't let you become like me, because I'm still waiting for you to take over my position when you grow up. At that time I will take Miss Li and fly far away. Hug my wife, dream on. The little bun who didn't know that after being tricked by his father, He was tricked by his uncle. Opened his eyes wide. Of course not. Uncle said that diligent government makes a good emperor. Everything his uncle said was right. Thank you for the reminder, but your father, I am not an emperor. Emo Shuyao said with waning interest. Although he had learned many things, the 5-year-old little bun still didn't completely understand the difference between a prince and an emperor. Moreover, in the Northwest, the difference between an emperor and a prince wasn't that big. Classmate Emo Xiaobao's understanding was that there were many princes in other places, so princes had to listen to the emperor. However, there was only one prince in the Northwest, his father, and he didn't have to listen to the emperor. Therefore, his father, this prince, was one of a kind and was also the greatest prince in the world. What was so great about being an emperor? Xiling had one, Dechu State had one, and Northern Rong and Southern Zhao had one each. The more emperors there were, the less valuable they were. However, there was only one Prince Ding. If he wanted to be one, he had to be the most unique and most valuable one. Emo Xiaobao's strange concept directly caused the establishment of an empire to be delayed by many, many years. Unable to outtalk his father, Emo Xiaobao proudly turned his head and fell into his mother's embrace. Emo Shuyao ignored him and looked at him with a smile. Son, your great-grandfather must have told you many history books. In history, there were emperors who went to court every 10 days to half a month and still had the country prospering. There were also emperors who woke up in the middle of the night and still had their country destroyed. Therefore, whether an emperor is good or bad has nothing to do with whether you are diligent or not. Emo Xiaobao thought about it and crawled out of his mother's embrace. He nodded and said, I know it also has to do with being smart. The idiot that father mentioned who woke up in the middle of the night was the idiot emperor of Dechu State. After saying this, Emo Xiaobao nodded heavily to confirm his own thoughts. Seeing him so serious, Emo Shuyao couldn't help but laugh. He said with a smile, How do you know it's that idiot? His country hasn't been destroyed yet. Emo Jingqi did wake up in the middle of the night and sleep in the middle of the night, but it wasn't necessarily because he was diligent. Emo Shuyao felt that it was more because he was guarding against this and that and couldn't sleep. Emo Xiaobao said seriously, Of course he's an idiot. He chased father away, he also chased granduncle and uncle away. He also likes the worst Prime Minister Lu's family and doesn't like Wu Jiejie's mother. Even his own mother and younger brother don't like him. Wu Jiejie also doesn't like him. Eldest uncle says this is called destroying the Great Wall. Feng San says this is called asking for death. Yi Li, who originally found it interesting, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What kind of nonsense did he learn? Along the way they chatted and laughed. Time passed quickly and unknowingly it was already noon. The horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of a mountain. After getting off the carriage they had to walk the rest of the way. Emo Shuyao naturally couldn't let Yi Li carry Emo Xiaobao, who was about to become fat, for such a long distance, so he could only carry him himself. Emo Xiaobao didn't feel uncomfortable in his father's arms at all. He calmly laid down and curiously looked at everything in front of him while asking, Mother, where are we going? Yi Li faintly smiled and said, You'll know when we get there. Actually, the father and son's relationship wasn't that bad. Although they usually quarreled, it could be seen that Emo Xiaobao didn't have any grudges against his unkind father. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so happy lying in his father's arms. The group walked into the mountain. In less than 5 li, the road gradually became more heavily guarded. The deeper they went, the stricter the security became. Along the way, the guards all bowed to the two, until they were stopped at a checkpoint. Token password. Emo Shuyao knew this place before, but because he gave full authority to Yi Li, he didn't really come here. Hearing this, he couldn't help being surprised. With a smile, he said, I also need a token and password? The guards at the checkpoint didn't move at all. Token password. Emo Shuyao raised an eyebrow as he looked at Yi Li. With his sharp senses, he could naturally feel that there were at least several hundred arrows pointing in their direction. If there wasn't a token and password, Emo Shuyao didn't doubt that these soldiers would really shoot arrows. Yi Li took out a very unique-looking token and handed it over to the soldier. Soldier's spirit, return the token. The soldier looked at the token and confirmed its authenticity before returning it to her. Wu Wei, I'm not afraid. Princess, please come in. After entering, they passed through 3 or 4 similar checkpoints on the way. The password for each checkpoint was completely different. Adding on the advantage of the terrain and this kind of defense, even Emo Shuyao didn't have the confidence to say that they could enter unharmed. Li, I'm really more and more curious about what is inside. This mysterious place wasn't far from Glass City, but no one would have thought that this originally unremarkable place was the true tomb of the previous dynasty's great ancestor, or rather the location of the treasure. This tomb wasn't as grand as a normal emperor's tomb. It couldn't even be compared to the empty tomb near Hong Province. It could barely be considered a huge underground palace built in the mountains. There were no beautiful marble decorations, no gold, silver, jewels, or rare treasures. It was just like an ordinary underground palace. If people came in looking for treasures, they would definitely be disappointed. And now there were already a lot of people busily walking in and out of this place. Mo Shuyao curiously looked at these people busily making some strange metal tools. Especially in the innermost area, many people were gathered together to study a hollow copper pillar that was as thick as a person. Even though he didn't know what it was, but looking at the hollow copper pillar for some reason, Mo Shuyao intuitively felt a trace of danger. Calmly moving away from the hole in the copper pillar, Mo Shuyao turned to look at Yi Li and raised his brows. Li, this is the thing left behind by the previous dynasty's great ancestor? To be honest, I really don't understand what this thing is. Yi Li looked at him and softly sighed. Actually, I also don't understand whether this is good or not. When she first came here and saw the thing left behind by the previous dynasty's great ancestor, she was shocked. At the same time, she was a bit hesitant. Without natural development, was it really good to let the cold weapon era enter the hot weapon era? Presumably, that senior was also hesitant, so this place had never been truly used. Therefore, in the history of the previous dynasty, she had never seen anything that shouldn't have appeared in this era. Then, does Li understand now? Mo Shuyao asked with a smile. Yi Li smiled faintly. Let nature take its course. Chapter 569. Yes, let nature take its course. If Yi Li had not been reborn into this era that she was completely unfamiliar with, but into a dynasty in history, she would not have hesitated. She would definitely take out these things without any hesitation. So what if she pushed forward the course of history? It would not be worse than the original history. Right now, Yi Li did not hesitate for long. She was not a person that liked to be conflicted. It was just that no matter if it was Emperor Gaozu of the previous dynasty or herself, they did not have much understanding of the military industry. She didn't know the original identity of the previous dynasty's great ancestor, but even if Yi Li knew the structure of all the most advanced weapons in the world like the back of her hand, it didn't mean that she could create the exact same weapon. Needless to say, he couldn't solve the problem of materials alone. Therefore, Yi Li did not treat this place as a place where weapons of mass destruction could be mass-produced on the battlefield. Instead, she used the most basic knowledge that the skilled craftsmen of this era could understand to give them a completely different concept from the current era. Yi Li did not need them to immediately create an AK-47 or long-range missile. They only needed to work hard in this direction. No matter if it was 100 years or 100 years, Yi Li believed that with these seeds, this land would not encounter what her hometown had experienced in the future. Wang Fei. A middle-aged man walked over. When he saw Yi Li, his eyes lit up and he rushed over with a fanatical expression. Mo Shuyao held Mo Xiaobao as he coldly stared at the charging man. He narrowed his eyes in displeasure and stepped in front of Yi Li. The charging man stopped in his tracks. Seeing Mo Xuyao's gloomy expression, he knew that his actions just now had been rude. He could only awkwardly stand there not knowing what to do. Yi Li walked out from behind Mo Shuyao and said with a faint smile, "Master Li, what is it?" The middle-aged man quickly said, "We have made the things Wang Fei gave us, but there are some questions we want to ask Wang Fei." Yi Li nodded and said, "Then let's go take a look together." Placed in front of Yi Li and Mo Shuyao was a pistol. Mo Shuyao was naturally unfamiliar with the things in front of him, but Yi Li's eyes flashed with a trace of nostalgia and joy. She walked up and picked up the gun on the table. To be honest, Yi Li had seen all sorts of advanced weaponry in her previous life. The gun in front of her was so crude that it was unbearable to look at. Compared to the earliest automatic handguns in the world in his previous life, it was much cruder. However, it only took them 5 years to go through the hundreds of years of evolution in the history of firearms. Yi Li believed that these skilled craftsmen had done their best to create such a weapon. Picking up the pistol, Yi Li turned around and smiled at Xiaobao. "Xiaobao, cover your ears." Mo Xiaobao looked curiously at the thing in his mother's hand, but he still obediently covered his ears with his little hands. The pistol spun in Yi Li's hand. Yi Li's eyes changed as she raised the gun and fired 3 shots at the target not far away. After the 3 loud bangs, Yi Li looked at the target in front of her and slightly frowned. The first shot had hit the bullseye, the second shot had only hit the 4th ring, and the 3rd shot had missed. Of course, this was not a problem with Yi Li's marksmanship. It was clear that this was a problem with the gun itself. Master Li, who was following behind, still had a burning gaze, but this time he was not looking at Yi Li but at the gun in her hand. This thing that Yi Li disliked was as precious as a peerless beauty in his eyes. Master Li scratched his beard in annoyance and said, "We've made 2 of these things and one of them just exploded. This one is fine but we can't hit it. The more we hit, the more we missed. There really hasn't been anyone like Wang Fei who has hit the bullseye on the first try." However, the 2nd and 3rd shots were clearly not good. The difference was so great that he couldn't help but wonder if Wang Fei's first shot was an accident. It seems like it's a problem with the materials. As for suggestions for improvement, I will organize them for you later. I'll have to trouble you to worry about the materials. I will order people to send all the needed minerals. I can't do anything else. She was not a military expert, nor was she an expert in military materials. She could only give them the general information she knew and some concepts and theories. They had to explore the rest step by step. Master Li felt some regret, but he knew he could not force this and could only nod in agreement. Master Li, who had a lot on his mind, left, but he left the gun behind. Even though this was the first finished product they had made, because the results were not satisfactory, Master Li did not feel any heartache and kept it. He even encouraged himself to make better things when they returned. Yi Li took out the remaining bullets in the gun before throwing it to Mo Xiaobao, who had been eagerly waiting to play. Receiving the new toy, Mo Xiaobao immediately focused all his attention on the thing in his hands. He did not care about his father holding him in his arms and not letting him come down to play. "This is something left behind by the previous Emperor Gaozu?" Mo Xiuyao looked around and asked. Yi Li nodded. She looked at Mo Xiuyao and asked, "Xiuyao, what do you think of this gun?" Mo Xiuyao shook his head and looked at the thing in Mo Xiaobao's hands, saying, "It has no practical value. Its range was not as far as the arrows of a master archer." Even though the first shot had made him interested, the last 2 shots had made him disappointed. For now, it has no practical value. Yi Li nodded in agreement and pulled Mo Xiuyao forward. The things that the previous emperor had prepared naturally were not just these. Even Yi Li herself didn't know much about it, and it wasn't like she didn't have anything that had practical value. As they walked into an empty room, the smell of sulfur greeted them. In the corner of the room there were several wooden boxes neatly placed. Yi Li walked over and opened the topmost box. There were some black spherical things in the box. Mo Xiuyao pondered for a moment before saying, "This is gunpowder?" It was not that this era did not have gunpowder. There were already people who used it in war. However, gunpowder needed to be ignited with fire and its killing power was not high, so even the Mahist army did not use it often. However, this did not mean that Mo Xiuyao was completely ignorant. Yi Li nodded and said, "That's right, it is gunpowder. However, I prefer to call it a bomb." Mo Xiuyao raised his brows and asked, "How is the power?" Since Li specially showed it to him, it naturally would not be normal. Yi Li casually picked up one and said with a smile, "Let's try it somewhere else and we'll know." It was hard to say about other weapons, but Yi Li was still very confident in the power of the bomb. This was because the method to make these bombs was not left behind by the previous Emperor Gaozu. It was provided by Yi Li herself. As expected, the bomb was thrown into a spacious room in the underground palace. After a loud explosion, Mo Xiuyao could not help but reveal a look of surprise. After leaving the place where the bomb was placed, Yi Li brought Mo Xiuyao into the innermost secret room in the underground palace. The layout of the room was very simple. It was filled with all kinds of scrolls and magical weapons. Mo Xiuyao saw that a few of them were the same as the ones he had seen when he passed by outside. Chapter 570. Yi Li took out a thick booklet from a hidden compartment and handed it to Mo Xiuyao. She smiled and said, "This is the treasure left behind by the previous emperor." Mo Xiuyao took the booklet and flipped through it. The pages were filled with drawings of various firearms as well as annotations. However, there were many foreign characters in the annotations that Mo Xiuyao could not understand. However, this did not stop him from understanding. This was a booklet filled with drawings of various weapons, and the ones that could be made here were all of the worst quality. This was because many of them looked much better than the toys that Emo Xiaobao loved so much that he could not bear to part with them. Looking at the booklet, Yili softly sighed and said, "If we can really make all of these things and mass-produce them, then the army that obtains them will be truly invincible." Emo Xiaoyao frowned slightly. He looked at Yili and asked, "Does Li like these things a lot?" Yili was slightly startled. After a long time she nodded and said, "Yes, I like them a lot." How could she not like them? In the short 20 years of her previous life she had been working with these things for 20 years. She was familiar with them and liked them as if they were her family and comrades. Emo Xiaoyao said, "Then let's have people make them all." Yili smiled and said, "Making them all? I'm afraid we won't be able to see it in our lifetime. If we really want to make all of these things, how can it be done without 100 or 200 years? The military was not the only aspect that was involved in this. Every aspect of technology had to be developed at the same time to be able to create such advanced weapons. Emo Xiaoyao frowned and said, "If that's the case, then this Emperor Gaozu of the previous dynasty really was a genius. It's a pity that he did not make these things back then. Or perhaps he wanted to make them but did not have the time." After the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu ascended the throne and unified the world, he did not rule for too long. Based on the scale of this underground palace, it was very likely that he died before he could complete it. Yili smiled faintly. "A genius? Perhaps." Naturally, the blueprints left behind were not considered geniuses. In fact, in Yi Li's opinion, these blueprints could not even be considered professional. At most, they were at the level of an amateur weapon enthusiast. However, it was not easy for a transmigrator to unify the world in a chaotic world. Even the founder of the Dechu state could not be considered to have truly unified the world. After all, Xiling and Dechu state were originally one entity. Yili herself could be considered a transmigrator or a reborn person, so she naturally understood that people like them could not be said to be blessed by the heavens. Although it was an additional chance to survive, it wasn't that easy to be as domineering as in many novels, with groups of underlings and beautiful women. Her environment was already not bad and she had experienced so many things. One could imagine how much hardship and hard work that Senior had gone through to create a dynasty. Is Li very familiar with him? Emo Xiaoyao placed Emo Xiaobao on the table and turned to look at Yili as he asked. Emo Xiaobao seemed to have sensed that his parents were talking about something very important. He did not speak much and obediently sat on the table playing with the small toy in his hand. Just now, Yili had retracted the bullet too quickly, so this child did not notice that something was missing from the gun. So he was very confused as to why he could not shoot something powerful from the gun like his mother. Yili smiled faintly and fondly stroked the calligraphy on the booklet on the table. The person in the booklet had very showily used flowery characters to leave an English signature. The people of this era could only see it as a pattern. After pondering for a moment, Yili said, "I am somewhat familiar with this previous dynasty's great ancestor. Perhaps no one in this world is more familiar with him than me." Emo Xiaoyao was silent. Yili smiled at him and asked, "You don't suspect my relationship with him?" Emo Xiaoyao said, "Li is the granddaughter of the Su family. The descendants of the Su family could not have any relationship with the previous dynasty's emperor." Yili blinked and asked, "Then you don't have anything you want to ask?" Emo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment before asking, "Li came from the same place as him?" Yili was stunned. She did not think that Emo Xiaoyao would make such a guess. So close. No, this was the real answer. Emo Xiaoyao looked at her with a gentle gaze and smiled faintly. "Li has never hidden anything from me, has she? She clearly came from a scholarly family and has never interacted with outsiders, yet she has such inconceivable skills. There is also Li's familiarity with the battlefield. Occasionally she has some strange but novel ideas. There is also the writing on that treasure map. Even the previous dynasty's imperial family did not recognize it, yet Li seems to be very familiar with it. And I feel that previous dynasty's great ancestor is actually very similar to Li in some ways." Yili smiled helplessly and said, "So I actually revealed so many flaws." Emo Xiaoyao gently stroked Yili's cheek and said with a smile, "Li has never hidden anything." Yili admitted that other than the very beginning in front of Emo Xiaoyao, she had never seriously tried to hide anything. It was not only because Emo Xiaoyao was too sensitive, but deliberately trying to hide things would only backfire. More importantly, Emo Xiuyao was the most important person in her life. If she still had to hide things in front of him, then she might as well have been a well-behaved girl from the very beginning. It was too tiring. Sizing up Emo Xiuyao with some curiosity, Yili asked, "What does Emo Xiuyao think of me?" Emo Xiuyao said, "Buddhism and Taoism all talk about past and present lives. Did Lili carry the memories of her past life from the moment she was born?" Lili's personality had not changed much since she was young, and there were no problems with her memory. Even if it was when she was very young, she could still remember clearly and the feelings between her and the Su family. Naturally, it would not be the reincarnation of a soul in a corpse that was written in those supernatural stories. Then it could only be explained by past and present lives. Yili nodded, smiling as she looked at Emo Xiuyao and said, "Counting it like this, I'm actually over 50 years old this year. I'm much older than you." Emo Xiuyao narrowed his eyes unhappily, staring at Yili's slightly proud smile with warning. If Emo Xiuyao was not still sitting at the table and staring at the two, perhaps Emo Xiuyao would not be so polite. He glanced at the chubby child on the table with disdain. Children are really the biggest hindrance. Seeing that Emo Xiuyao did not say anything, Yili's eyes turned and said, "Actually, I was a man in my past life. Do you really not mind?" "Man," Emo Xiuyao said in a low voice. Yili nodded, saying seriously, "That's right, I was a soldier in my past life. It could be considered as sacrificing my life for the country. Otherwise, why do you think I'm a woman dressed as a man?" In the understanding of the people of this era, soldiers were naturally men. She stared at Emo Xiuyao curiously and asked, "Xiuyao, you really don't mind?" Suddenly having the interest to tease people, Yili smiled as she looked at the man in front of her who was as calm as water. Emo Xiuyao lowered his head and stared at Yili for a while, then suddenly grabbed Yili and fiercely kissed her tender red lips. Woo! Yili was stunned, her eyes suddenly widening, but she accidentally glanced at a certain chubby child behind Emo Xiuyao looking at them, his dark eyes filled with curiosity. A wave of heat immediately spread to her face. Yili hurriedly used all her strength to push Emo Xiuyao away. Seeing that Emo Xiuyao was staring at her lips as if he wanted more, Yili could only fiercely glare at him. She was extremely regretful of her actions of teasing Emo Xiuyao in front of her 5-year-old son. Yili felt that she had never lost so much face in her 2 lifetimes. She only hoped that her family's Xiao Bao was still young and would quickly forget about this matter. Otherwise, she really didn't have the face to face her son. "Now you know whether I mind or not?" Emo Xiuyao asked in a low voice as he smiled at her angry red face. Yili gritted her teeth. Prince's psychological adaptability is really strong. Emo Xiuyao smiled but didn't answer, looking at Yili who was still angry. She really was a stupid girl. How could the usually elegant and graceful Lili, whose every action was filled with flirtatious charm in his eyes, be a man in her past life? Father King, mother. Emo Xiaobao blinked his pure big eyes as he looked at his parents, curiously asking, "Father King and mother are playing kissing?" Xiaobao also wants to play. "Mother, kiss kiss." In order to express his expectation, Emo Xiaobao deliberately used his little chubby hand to point at his pink and tender little mouth. Yili turned pale with fright. "Chinner, who told you that mother and are playing kissing?" Her son was only 5 years old. Did he need to be so precocious? She remembered that they had never done anything too intimate in front of Xiaobao. Was it because she always kissed Xiaobao? Emo Xiaobao seriously thought about it and said, "It's Father King all. Last time I saw Father King secretly kissing mother while she was asleep. Father King said that only people who love each other can play kissing. Xiaobao also loves mother. Xiaobao wants a kiss." Emo Xiuyao. Yili angrily glared at Emo Xiuyao. "This month you will sleep in the study." Finished speaking, she didn't wait for Emo Xiuyao's explanation and turned to leave. Emo Xiuyao's face darkened as he stared at Emo Xiaobao on the table. Emo Xiaobao innocently looked at his Father King with his pure big eyes. "Father King, why is mother angry? Why didn't she kiss Xiaobao? Does mother not love Xiaobao anymore? Don't think that you can escape by pretending to be innocent. When did I secretly kiss your mother? Even if he secretly kissed her, how could it be seen by a 5-year-old kid?" He, Emo Xiuyao, who had been unhindered for a lifetime, was actually tricked by his own son. Seeing that Emo Xiuyao was about to stretch out his evil claws, Emo Xiaobao quickly crawled up and used his butt to cry in front of his father. "Woo! Mother doesn't love Xiaobao anymore. Xiaobao is the child that mother doesn't love. Looking at his son who was lying on the table with his little but sticking up and crying, Mo Shuyao finally didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When this kid grows up he will definitely be a disaster. Chapter 571. In the early winter of the 18th year of Emperor Jing's reign in Dechu State, the barbarian tribes in the north of Dechu State invaded. Emperor Mo Jingqi mobilized 300,000 soldiers to expel the enemy but was defeated. Of the 300,000 elite soldiers, only 70 to 80,000 remained and fled. Within a month, the defending generals of Dechu State retreated several cities. The northern army chased them all the way to Zijing Pass in the north of Dechu State. They were less than 400 li away from the Chu capital. In the 12th month, Mo Jingqi appointed northern general Leng Huai as the general to suppress the enemy. Leng Huai's eldest son Leng Qingyu as the deputy general to lead 400,000 soldiers to face the enemy. However, the barbarians in the north were brave and skilled in battle. They had been fighting for many years and were very valiant. Even a veteran like Leng Huai, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, could barely hold on. It was extremely difficult to reclaim the land they had lost. The two armies in front of Zijing Pass faced each other for a long time. The people in Dechu State were also anxious and restless. Many courtiers had even suggested moving the capital to Guangling in the south. Mo Jingqi naturally would not agree to moving the capital. Now the south was actually Mo Jingli's territory. In Jing, this younger brother of his was faintly looking down on him. If he went to the south, Mo Jingli would probably dare to directly usurp the throne. But even so, Mo Jingqi's days were not easy. Just the daily battle reports sent to the imperial court were enough to give him a headache. There were also the people who had fled to Jing because of the chaos of war. Large numbers of people flooded into Jing, but there was limited space in the capital. Naturally, it could not take in so many refugees. But if these refugees were allowed to starve, die of illness, or freeze to death, it would probably cause chaos before the powerful soldiers of the north attacked. Looking at the mountain of memorials in front of him, Mo Jingqi had a splitting headache. Only now did he have to admit in his heart that compared to Mo Shuyao he was not as capable. Mo Shuyao was able to turn the tide in such a dire situation, but he could only rage at a mess of reports. In the depths of the imperial palace, noble consort Lu sat by the window, silently looking at the pure white snow outside. The snow-white snow fox cloak made her cold face look like an ice sculpture, chilling to the bone. Behind her, Tan Jiji was sitting on a soft couch at the side. He was holding onto a heater as he revealed a comfortable expression and sighed. "Isn't imperial concubine Yang Yang afraid of the cold? It's all white outside, what's there to see?" Noble consort Lu looked back and glanced at him coldly. "Why are you here?" Tan Jiji smiled and said, "Of course I'm here to help noble consort." Noble consort Lu sneered and said disdainfully, "Help me?" He was nothing more than a drowning dog that was wanted in Nanzhao. What's the use of you and Shu Manlin's meticulous plans? If Prince Ding and Su Qingchen moved their fingers, wouldn't you have no choice but to run away with your tail between your legs? Now that you don't have Shu Manlin, what other cards do you have? Tan Jiji's expression changed slightly. A trace of anger and viciousness flashed through his eyes. He quickly smiled and said, "Does noble consort Yang Yang think that Shu Manlin is the only card I have?" Noble consort Lu looked at him calmly and said, "What else do you have? Do you want to say that you're a descendant of the imperial family of the previous dynasty? You're all descendants of the imperial family. That young Master Lin Yuan did much better than you. You've been working hard for so many years without accomplishing anything, and you still dare to say that you want to help I?" "Shut up." Tan Jiji was furious. His expression was ferocious. Who does Ren Qining think he is? He's just an imposter. He was the imperial family's descendant of the previous dynasty. He was Lin Yuan. Ren Qining was just an imposter who came out of nowhere. Noble consort Lu snorted and didn't say anything else, but the contempt in her eyes was obvious. Did he think that the title of the imperial family's descendant was valuable? A descendant of the imperial family that had perished nearly 200 years ago because the people had no way to make a living could never win the support of the people. That Ren Qining, who called himself Lin Yuan, probably saw this clearly and chose to start from the northern region. As long as he really took over the world and announced his identity as the imperial family's descendant, the resistance to his ascension to the throne would be much lower. Compared to a foreign race entering the Central Plains and becoming the emperor, the people and gentry would naturally be more willing to accept a descendant of the previous dynasty with noble blood. Seeing noble consort lose contempt, Tanjiji breathed heavily to hide the viciousness in his eyes. Finally he laughed and said, "You really don't need it? Maybe I can tell noble consort Lu a very important piece of news. Of course, if noble consort Lu isn't interested, then forget it." Noble consort Lu frowned slightly and stared at Tanjiji with some displeasure. It seemed that she was considering whether she should listen to his so-called news. Tanjiji leaned on the soft couch and said with a smile, "Noble consort Lu, don't worry. This may not be bad news for you." Noble consort Lu narrowed her eyes. "It may not be bad news, but it could be bad news." "Go ahead." Tanjiji raised his eyebrows and said, "Prince Li bought a magical medicine from the Holy Land of Nanjiang." Noble consort Lu looked at him coldly and didn't even blink. Her indifferent look seemed to be saying that it had nothing to do with her. Tanjiji laughed loudly and looked at noble consort Lu, saying, "I like noble consort Lu's personality. It's so cold and heartless that it makes people admire you." That was why Prince Ding didn't like this kind of woman. She was as beautiful as an ice sculpture, and her heart was so cold and heartless that it could make any man admire her wholeheartedly. Look at the Princess Ding married to Prince Ding. She was elegant and graceful when she was calm, but radiant when she acted. She could be kind and cruel, but she could also be gentle and strong. She had outstanding abilities and a devoted husband. She had an extraordinary status, but she wasn't arrogant at all. This kind of woman was the dream of every man. Noble consort Lu's appearance and talent were nothing in the eyes of a man who really had excellent taste. Of course, he would never tell this proud woman in front of him about this. Noble consort Lu looked at Tanjiji with a frown. For some reason she felt that Tanjiji's words weren't all compliments. But it didn't matter. She had never taken Tanjiji seriously, so she didn't care what he thought of her. "Noble consort Lu, are you really not interested in what Prince Li bought?" "Noble consort Lu, you don't want to know who Prince Li bought it for?" Tanjiji said with a smile. Noble consort Lu thought of something and looked at Tanjiji calmly. Tanjiji knew her very well, so he knew that he had aroused her interest. Tanjiji didn't try to hide it. He said with a smile, "Yes, it's what you think. It's for the one in the imperial study. And I guess that the medicine has been used for a month." Noble consort Lu frowned and said, "His Majesty doesn't feel unwell." Tanjiji said with a smile, "Of course he doesn't feel unwell. Not only that, his body will be very good. But once the medicine stops or it's been used for too long, His Majesty will suffer a lot. There used to be a lot of medicine, but after Princess Anxi ascended the throne, the sacred land of Nanjiang rebelled and burned the entire sacred land of Nanjiang to the ground. Of course the medicine is gone. Mo Shuyao has no more than half a year's supply." Noble consort Lu thought for a while with a frown, then asked, "What do you want?" Chapter 572. Tanjiji smiled faintly, "What I want? I'm afraid you can't give it to me right now. Why don't we talk about it when you can?" The noble consort lowered her eyes, hiding the sharpness and murderous intent in her eyes. She said faintly, "All right, as long as I can do it, I can promise you anything. However, what can you do for I right now?" Tanjiji smiled. "This one has been by Mo Jingqi's side for more than a decade. No one in this world knows better than me what he will do. Isn't this enough? Doesn't noble consort Lu want to know who Mo Jingqi's true confidants are? I can help you deal with Prince Li." Noble consort Lu's eyes moved. After a while she nodded and said, "It's a deal. I hope you won't disappoint." Tanjiji smiled. "Noble consort, just wait and see." The 19 years of Emperor Jing's reign could be considered the worst year since the founding of Dechu state. Before the new year was over, news of Leng Huai's defeat and his request for help came from the border. It had to be known that Zijing Pass was less than 400 li away from the capital. If they rode fast, they could get there in one day. If they continued to lose at this distance, they would be right in front of their eyes. In addition, just after receiving Leng Huai's request for help, Mo Jingqi fell ill. Although he was barely able to attend court, anyone with a discerning eye could see that the emperor was seriously ill just by looking at his sallow complexion and dispirited spirit. With the two matters overlapping, it made people feel as if there was no light at all. It was as if Dechu State's fate was coming to an end. Emo Jingqi barely managed to gather the troops and rations to support Leng Huai before he fell ill on the bed and was bedridden. In the bedroom, the Empress Dowager, who had been abstaining from worldly affairs for a long time, and the Empress, who had been recuperating behind closed doors, appeared. At the same time, Prince Li, noble consort Lu, Prime Minister Lu, and several princes of the imperial family were waiting in the room. After the imperial physician finished taking the pulse, the Empress Dowager anxiously asked, "Imperial physician, what's wrong with the emperor's body?" The imperial physician who was taking the pulse frowned and respectfully said, "The emperor seems to have taken some medicine that is harmful to his body. Coupled with the daily fatigue, his body suddenly collapsed." The Empress Dowager suddenly stood up and said, "What do you mean by harmful drugs? Someone poisoned the emperor?" The imperial physician shook his head and said, "Forgive me, Empress Dowager." Empress Dowager misunderstood. What this humble subject means is, His Majesty seems to have taken something forbidden. That's why he hurt his body. The expressions of everyone in the sleeping chamber changed instantly, and they all became a little strange. Emo Jingli stepped forward and said, "Imperial brother, please be clear. This younger brother will definitely not have the intention to kill you. If you don't believe me, just give the order to kill me." Emo Jingqi stared at Emo Jingli with hatred. It seemed that he wanted to cut Emo Jingli into pieces. However, he couldn't say a word at this moment. He felt that his limbs and bones were being bitten by countless ants. If he didn't care so much about his face, he would have been rolling on the bed and screaming in pain. His lips trembling, Emo Jingqi spat out a few words. "Get out! Get out!" Everyone was stunned. Prime Minister Lu looked at Emo Jingqi anxiously. At this moment they should take advantage of the victory and arrest Prince Li. However, since His Majesty had spoken, the others naturally couldn't stay. The Empress Dowager stood up and said, "Emperor, take care of yourself. I will go back first." The Empress Dowager left first and the others had to follow her. Emo Jingli was the last to leave. He looked back at Emo Jingli, who was lying on the bed with a weird smile on his face. Back in Zhangde Palace, Missouri Jingli said respectfully to the Empress Dowager, "Mother, thank you very much, Pop." Before he could finish speaking, a slap landed swiftly and harshly on Emo Jingli's face. Emo Jingli stopped talking and raised his head to look at the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager's eyes were cold and full of sadness and disappointment. "Li Heir, how dare you use such a vicious drug on Qi? He's your brother. Do you still have any humanity?" Emo Jingli wanted to explain. "Mother, The Empress Dowager waved her hand and said coldly, "You don't need to explain. I am not muddle-headed." Emo Jingli put down his hand that was covering half of his face. The Empress Dowager's slap was not for show. A few red and swollen finger marks appeared on Emo Jingli's face immediately. Emo Jingli stopped quibbling and said coldly, "Mother, you are right. So what if I did it? Is Imperial Mother the same as that old man surnamed Lu? Do you also want to lock me up?" Although she knew it was Emo Jingli who did it, the Empress Dowager was still emotional when she heard it from him. She couldn't help crying. Her face, which had been well maintained, suddenly aged more than 10 years. She sat on the luxurious phoenix chair, tears streaming down her face. "What a sin! Why did I give birth to you two bastards? I am sorry to the late emperor, I am sorry to the ancestors of the Emo family." Emo Jingli looked coldly at the Empress Dowager's crying appearance. He didn't feel any guilt in his heart. The one who stirred up the ambition in his heart was no one else but the crying mother in front of him. Because she was dissatisfied with her imperial brother controlling her day by day, she wanted to depose him and push him to the throne. The struggle for the throne had always been a bloody one, and now she was blaming him for being cruel and merciless. It was a pity that there was no turning back. He and Emo Jingqi were destined to fight to the death the moment his ambition was born. "Li Heir, Qi Heir is your brother. Give the antidote to him. Mother will protect you." The Empress Dowager was finally tired from crying and said in a hoarse voice. Emo Jingli's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Mother, after being the Empress Dowager for more than 10 years, you are even more naive than before." The Empress Dowager was stunned. She coldly looked at the familiar yet strange son in front of her, as if she didn't know him. Emo Jingli lightly said, "Not to mention that I don't have the antidote. Even if I did, I wouldn't give it." Mother, do you really think that if Jingqi was cured he would let me go? The Empress Dowager was so angry by his heartless words that she trembled. She pointed at Jingli and angrily said, "You bastard. A lifetime of fighting for power. Now that she was over 60 years old she was really tired. She only hoped that her two sons would be safe and sound. But why did she have to watch her two sons kill each other in her 60 years of age? Was this really retribution?" Jingli indifferently smiled and said, "Since it's like this, why didn't Mother follow that old man surnamed Lu's wishes and just lock Son up? In Mother's eyes, isn't there something more important than your son?" The Empress Dowager silently pointed at Jingli and couldn't say anything for a while. That's right. In her heart there was still something more important than her son, which was power. If Qing couldn't make it, then Li couldn't have anything happen to him. Otherwise, if something happened to Qing, one of the two princes born by noble consort Lu would ascend the throne. The Empress Dowager had always been on bad terms with noble consort Lu's family. If noble consort Lu's son became the emperor, what good would it bring her? Even though the Empress Dowager was noble, her grandmother was far less intimate than her mother. Moreover, noble consort Lu's son was not close to her. But even so, it didn't mean that she was willing to let her younger son kill her elder son. The Empress Dowager looked at her gloomy son in front of her and found that she didn't know what to say. Jingli raised his eyebrows and said, "Mother, don't worry. I won't kill him. He is still my brother, isn't he?" Of course he wouldn't kill Jingqi. He wanted him to lie on the bed unable to move and watch as he held power in his hands and even ruled over the world. More importantly, he couldn't let Jingqi die too suddenly. Even though Xiuyao had severed ties with the Dechu state, Jingli wasn't sure if he would use Jingqi's death as an excuse to attack the Dechu state. From beginning to end, Jingli had never believed that Xiuyao didn't have ambition. He just lacked an excuse to realize his ambition. Chapter 573. Because of the emperor's serious illness, the entire palace was gloomy even before the new year. In the past few days, King Li's faction and Prime Minister Lu's faction had been fighting both openly and secretly. Everyone who was well informed knew why the emperor had fallen ill. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the golden throne in the hall. Even the request for help from Zijing Pass was ignored. Jingqi was lying on the bed. He was muddle-headed every day. It was difficult for him to even take care of himself, let alone deal with the affairs of the court. "Prince." The eunuch guarding outside the bedchamber had curled up his hands and feet to keep warm because of the cold weather. Seeing the man in brocade striding over, he hurriedly went forward to salute with a flattering smile on his face. Jingli looked at the eunuch in front of him proudly and said coldly, "I have something to discuss with my royal brother." The eunuch was stunned and said awkwardly, "But now the emperor." Jingli glanced around and said coldly, "What? I want to see my royal brother. Do I need your permission?" The eunuchs at the door were all shocked. They had received orders from Imperial Concubine and Prime Minister Lu to prevent King Li from entering, but no one knew the situation in the palace now. King Li was powerful now. They couldn't afford to offend him. After hesitating and deceiving, the eunuchs finally retreated and said with a flattering smile, "We don't dare. Prince, please." Jingli snorted and stepped into the bedchamber. The bright yellow and luxurious furnishings came into sight. Jingli's eyes shook slightly. Looking at Jingqi lying on the bed silently, Jingli suddenly felt a trace of indescribable pleasure. He knew Jingqi wasn't asleep. He walked to the bedside and looked down at the sallow and emaciated man on the bed. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. The secret medicine he got from Nanjiang was much more effective than the so-called 5 minerals powder. He didn't feel anything when taking it, but once he stopped taking it, it was 100 times more effective than the 5 minerals powder. It had only been a few days, but Jingqi had already become so skinny. After thinking about it, Jingli stuffed an extremely small pill into Jingqi's mouth. Jingqi's dark and dazed eyes gradually regained a trace of light. When he saw the person standing in front of his window, his eyes flashed with anger and his throat gurgled. Jingli remained calm and unruffled. He tilted his head and asked, "What does Imperial Brother want to say?" "You still dare to come?" Jingqi hissed. He hadn't spoken or eaten anything for several days, so his throat was dry and hoarse. Emo Jingli laughed. Why wouldn't I dare to come? Imperial brother, I'm worried about you. Emo Jingqi glared angrily at the person in front of him, as if he wanted to bite him to death. Emo Jingli leisurely walked to the bed and sat down. Emo Jingqi panted for a while before opening his mouth to say, You want to force this one to do it? Little brother. Don't forget that I am the older brother. The methods you used on that side were all left over from this one. Back then, this one really shouldn't have shown mercy to you. Emo Jingli knit his brows. Seeing Emo Jingqi smile, his heart felt a bit uneasy. At this point he really couldn't think of any other methods Emo Jingqi could have. Emo Jingli's brows furrowed tightly as he stared at the messy man on the bed. Emo Jingqi looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. He slowly said, Jingli, after all these years you only have one child, right? Emo Jingli slightly narrowed his eyes. He didn't understand why he would mention this at this time. He only heard Emo Jingqi slowly say, If this one says that you will only have one child in this lifetime, what will you do? What will you do? What do you mean? Emo Jingli's expression changed. He stepped forward and grabbed Emo Jingqi's collar to pull him up from the bed. For a man, having an heir was sometimes more important than having power. Although many people could sacrifice their children for power, that was because they had many children. If they didn't have a single one, then all the power and status in the world would immediately decrease by more than half. Sitting on the throne but not being able to pass it to one's own son was like a person who had painstakingly saved up a lifetime of money, only to end up benefiting someone else's son. Although Emo Jingli didn't have a son, his only son Yi Ying's child was indeed young and sickly. He wasn't even 7 years old, but people were always worried that he wouldn't live past the age of 20. Hearing Emo Jingqi say this, Emo Jingli's heart shook. He fiercely stared at Emo Jingqi and said, What did you do? Oh, you couldn't have had the chance to drug me. Emo Jingli wasn't someone who didn't have his guard up. In fact, he was more guarded against his older brother than anyone else. Normally, he was especially careful with his food, clothing, housing, and transportation. Emo Jingli wouldn't have had the chance to drug him. Chapter 574. Emo Jingqi chuckled. Seeing his younger brother's angry appearance made his mood very good. Jingli, you should thank Shun for letting you keep a child. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for not being a good prince and going against Jen. Emo Jingli's face was dark. After a long time he suddenly sneered, You also said that I still have a son. Do you believe that I won't kill all of your sons one by one? Emo Jingqi did not care about his threat at all. He smiled faintly, Do you really think that the one in your fu is your son? Jingli, you don't know. When Princess Consort Li gave birth to that child, Jin personally held him. That is a white, tender and sturdy little boy. That sickly child of yours is not even half as big as him. Bastard. Emo Jingli was furious. He fiercely threw Emo Jingqi back onto the bed. Then he pounced forward and grabbed his neck, shouting angrily, Where did you take Ai's son? Speak. Emo Jingqi seemed to not see the hand tightly strangling his neck. His waxy yellow face was red from choking. He still had his eyes half closed and did not care. In the end, Emo Jingli could only let him go in defeat. He could not really kill Emo Jingqi now. At that time he would not need the throne. He would become a monarch killer. Looking at the person lying on the bed, Emo Jingli sneered, You won't say anything? You think that I don't have a way to deal with you? I will kill a prince a day for you to see. There will be a day when you will speak. Emo Jingqi opened his eyes and looked at him. He calmly said, Jin is about to die, how can I control them? Even if you kill all of Jin's sons, so what? Chang'e is still in the northwest. Even if she is a daughter, she is still Jin's blood. As for you, you are destined to have no descendants. As long as you kill a prince, I guarantee that your son will be sent to your dining table the next morning. At this point, Emo Jingli had to admit that he was not as ruthless as his brother. What do you want? You should know that your body will never recover. Do you think you'll be safe and sound if you give the throne to noble consort Lu? In order to be absolutely safe, he would never use the antidote. When noble consort Lu was mentioned, Emo Jingqi's eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. He lowered his eyes and pondered for a while before saying, What I want to do has nothing to do with you. Not long after, Emo Jingqi's decree came from the palace. Noble consort Lu's eldest son, Emo Jingli, was conferred the title of crown prince. In addition, Prince Li Mo Jingli was conferred the title of Prince Regent. Once the imperial edict was released, the entire court was naturally shocked, but they did not understand the emperor's intentions. The courtiers who wanted to pick a side were also confused. Should they choose the crown prince or Prince Li? Inside the Li prince's mansion when Mo Jingli returned to the residence, Yi Ying and Princess Xixia came to greet him. Princess Xixia was still as beautiful as a flower, bright and moving. In comparison, Yi Ying looked much paler and thinner. The young woman who was just in her early 20s looked like she was nearing her 30s. She was holding the hand of a boy who looked less than 5 years old. However, everyone in the Prince Ding mansion knew that this prince and princess consort Lu's pampered little heir was already 7 years old this year. Prince, congratulations to Prince for being conferred the title of Prince Regent. From now on you have great power in your hands. Princess Xixia's smile was bright and charming. She looked sincere and happy, but she did not deliberately flatter him. This made Mo Jingli, who originally had a dark expression, unable to help but reveal a trace of a smile. A trace of jealousy flashed through Yi Ying's eyes. She led her son forward and said with a smile, "Qinxie and the little heir also congratulate Prince for being conferred the title of Prince Regent." After saying this, she slightly pinched the little heir's hand, indicating for him to speak. The little child's face was pale, and his body was so weak that it looked like he could fall over with a gust of wind. He leaned close to Yi Ying's side as if he was very afraid of his father Mo Jingli. Yi Ying secretly gritted her teeth. She really did not understand. She and Mo Jingli were not cowardly people. Why was it that this son of theirs was as timid as a mouse? Even his own father was afraid of him. The child timidly raised his head. His voice was as soft as a mosquito's as he called out to his father. Then he had nothing else to say. Mo Jingli looked at the cowering child in front of him and only felt the anger in his heart boil. It was as if it was about to burst out at any moment. How could such a weak and timid child be his Mo Jingli's son? He could not help but think of Mo Jingqi lying on the bed before he left the palace. Although he was very weak, his eyes were still filled with pride. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. His eyes that stared at the child seemed to be about to spit fire. Prince. Yi Ying looked at Mo Jingli with some confusion. At this moment, of course, she could tell that Mo Jingli was not happy because he had become the Prince Regent. In fact, he was very angry now. Yi Ying carefully supported her son who wanted to hide behind her out of fear and asked carefully. Mo Jingli coldly snorted, sending the child flying with a kick. After he sent people to investigate carefully, he found out that the midwives during Yi Ying's delivery were all arranged by Mo Jingqi. After Yi Ying gave birth, everyone in the manor had been replaced. No one knew where they went. Mo Jingli knew that Mo Jingqi was not lying. The sickly child in front of him was not his son at all. He really did not look like himself or Yi Ying. He was not ugly, but it was definitely obvious that even if he grew up, he would only be an ordinary-looking child. Prince. Ying screamed. All the servants and maids present, including Princess Xixia, were shocked. Ying pounced on the child. The child fell to the ground and vomited 2 mouthfuls of blood. He could not even cry. It looked like he was about to die. Yi Ying was so frightened that she almost did not dare to touch the child. She could only scream, "Son! Quick! Quick, go to the imperial physician." The servants came to their senses and looked at Mo Jingli hesitantly. The little heir was kicked by the prince. It was naturally up to the prince to call for the imperial physician. Although most people did not know medicine, they could tell that the little heir had been weak and sickly since he was young. After being kicked so hard by the prince, it was obvious that he was about to die. "You are not allowed to go," Mo Jingli said coldly. Ying looked up at Mo Jingli in shock. Tears hung on her face. She was momentarily at a loss. Prince. Mo Jingli's hatred for Yi Ying had reached its peak. This woman could not do anything right. Back then he had really gone crazy to want to marry her. And because of that he missed the opportunity. He went forward, grabbed Yi Ying and dragged her into the courtyard. Ying kept struggling. She looked at the dying child and cried endlessly. "Oh, Prince," the child. Mo Jingli's figure was behind the screen wall. Everyone present looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Princess Xixia looked at the child on the ground. A gloating smile appeared on her lips. She waved her hand and said, "Let's wait until the prince is done with his work." Yi Ying, who was being dragged away by Mo Jingli, struggled all the way. However, how could a weak woman like her break free? Ying was dragged back into the room by Mo Jingli. He pushed her hard. She lost her balance and bumped into the table in the room. Ying looked up and said with tears in her eyes, "Prince, why did you do that? That's our child. How could you be so heartless?" "Shut up," Mo Jingli said coldly. He stared coldly at Ying and said, "You're such an incompetent fool. You didn't even know that your child was swapped. You let I raise a bastard from who knows where for 7 years." Ying was stunned. She could not understand the meaning of Mo Jingli's words. Mo Jingli stared at her and said coldly, "Don't you understand? That sickly child is not I's son at all. That child was swapped when he was born." How could it be? That's impossible." Ying cried out involuntarily. The son she had carefully taken care of for several years was not her biological son? Then where did the child she gave birth to go? "Prince. Then, where is our child?" Ying asked anxiously. Mo Jingli said hatefully, "In Mo Jingqi's hands." Hearing that, Ying fell onto the chair weakly. All these years she was well aware of the relationship between Mo Jingli and Mo Jingqi. Now that the child had fallen into Mo Jingqi's hands, would there be a day she could get it back? Ying grabbed Mo Jingli's clothes in a panic and cried, "Prince, save our child. Ing begs you to save our child. Sob. My poor child." Mo Jingli pushed her away in annoyance. Of course he would save the child. He had to save him. Looking coldly at Ying who was crying by the table, Mo Jingli only felt that this once delicate and lovely woman was incomparably annoying. "From today onwards you stay in the backyard and don't come out. I don't want to see you again." Ying was stunned. She had just heard that her son had fallen into Mo Jingqi's hands, and now she was being grounded by Mo Jingli. How could she bear it? Why? Ying looked at Mo Jingli absent-mindedly. All these years she had already lost his love. If it were not for her son, she would have been forgotten long ago. The sweet love in the past was like a dream. Now was she going to lose all that she had left? Mo Jingli said coldly, "If it weren't for your stupidity, how could I not know the whereabouts of my son for so many years? Do you know what I have lost because of your stupidity? Back then mother was right. You are indeed a stupid and incompetent woman. If I didn't marry you back then." Thinking of the gentle woman he had seen once in city last year, Mo Jingli couldn't help but feel a sense of regret. After so many years she was still as elegant as an orchid, graceful and elegant. If it were her, this would never have happened. After taking one last look at Ying, Mo Jingli left without any reluctance, leaving behind Ying who was in a daze, silently crying. After a long time the sound of sobbing finally came from the room. Chapter 575. In an inconspicuous courtyard in the Chu capital, Leng Haoyu sat in the study with a gloomy expression. Murongting walked in with a cup of ginseng tea. When she saw the green shadow under his eyelids she couldn't help but frown. "What happened? Why are you in such a difficult situation?" Last night Leng Haoyu had been acting strangely after receiving a letter. He didn't sleep the whole night and just sat in the study in a daze. If it was a few years ago Murongting would have grabbed him and scolded him. However, after being married for a few years and living together, Murongting's impression of Leng Haoyu was no longer the idle playboy. Moreover, after becoming a wife and mother, her temper had obviously improved a lot. Putting the ginseng tea on the table, Murongting looked down at the letter on the table. Leng Haoyu didn't intend to hide it from her. He opened the letter and placed it on the table. It turned out that it was a letter sent by Leng Huai from Zijing Pass. Zijing Pass was now in urgent need of provisions, but the imperial court was busy with major events. Prime Minister Lu's faction and Prince Li's faction were in full swing, so no one paid attention to the letter sent by Leng Huai for help. Murongting frowned and sneered. "Does eunuch really think of us as a national treasury? He doesn't even know if you have the ability to ask for 100,000 dan of provisions. Where are we going to get it for him?" It was naturally not difficult for Leng Haoyu to get 100,000 dan of provisions, but that was the property of the Prince Ding mansion. It was not something that Leng Haoyu could use at will. Moreover, although the outside world knew that Leng Haoyu had been doing business outside for a few years, it would be strange if they weren't targeted by people from all walks of life if he casually gave out 100,000 dan of provisions. The Prince Ding mansion and the Dechu state no longer had anything to do with each other. Without Prince Ding's personal consent, who would dare to use provisions to support the Dechu state's army? However, Murongting also understood Leng Haoyu's dilemma. No matter how much Leng Huai ignored Leng Haoyu, he was still Leng Haoyu's biological father. Murongting also felt conflicted about the Dechu state. Leng Haoyu was a member of the Prince Ding mansion, so Murongting was naturally a member of the Prince Ding mansion. However, her father, Murong Shen, was a general who guarded the borders of Dechu state. They were of the same bloodline. How could it be so easy to cut them off? Looking at her husband's haggard and tired appearance, Murongting could only sigh helplessly and comfort him. We have already sent the news to the northwest. I think the prince's consort will reply soon. Father-in-law's side won't be unable to hold on for a few days. Leng Haoyu forced a smile. He leaned against the chair and reached out to hold his wife's hand on his shoulder. He apologized. I've made you worry. Murongting rolled her eyes at him and said, what are you talking about? We're husband and wife. If I'm not worried about you, who am I worried about? If you have the time to sit here and worry, you might as well have a good sleep. What if Prince Ding gives you some orders? You won't be able to handle it even if you're tired. Leng Haoyu smiled helplessly. How could he not understand the logic? It was just that the person who was experiencing the rain of swords and spears on the battlefield right now was his father. Although his father only had his eldest brother in his eyes since he was young, it was undeniable that in his heart he had always longed for his father's recognition. That was why he and Feng San became good friends. They both longed for their father's gaze and recognition but had never received it. It was just that Feng San was more carefree and more decisive than him. Reporting to young Master Leng, Prince's secret letter has arrived. Someone outside the door reported in a low voice. Leng Haoyu stood up in surprise and said loudly, come in quickly. He didn't know what Prince's decision was, but he hoped to know the result as soon as possible. The man outside the door whispered a sealed letter and then left. Leng Haoyu opened the letter and read it 10 lines at a glance. A trace of joy flashed through his eyes. Murongting only needed to look at his expression to know that it was a good result. She couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Although she hated the Leng family, she didn't want them to die. At least she didn't want Leng Huai to die like this. Otherwise, Leng Haoyu would definitely be sad. Leng Haoyu finished reading the letter and raised his head. Murongting asked, how is it? What did Prince Ding say? Leng Haoyu thought for a while and said, Ting go to Marquis Muyang's residence in a while. Just like the Leng family, Marquis Muyang's residence has outstanding military achievements for generations. Now that the border is in danger, it's time for them to contribute. Murongting frowned and said, Marquis Muyang has already had the intention to retire in the past few years. Can Yaoji persuade him? Leng Haoyu sneered and said, if he can't, isn't there still Muyang? Murongting nodded and said, I know. I haven't seen Marquis Muyang's heir consort for some time. I'll get someone to send a letter over later. Leng Haoyu nodded and smiled. There's another good news. Murongting raised her eyebrows and looked at him with a smile. Leng Haoyu said in a low voice, Prince and Princess will be coming to the capital in a few days. Hearing this, Murongting was shocked. At this time, Prince and Princess. Leng Haoyu laughed in a low voice. Li City has Mr. Hongyu and young Master Qingchen overseeing it. Outside, there are generals and hundreds of thousands of Mahist army stationed. Where can't Prince and Princess go? Chapter 576. This was the scene Muyang saw when he came in. A beautiful woman lovingly looked at the child who was reading with his head lowered. The light of the setting sun shone through the window, adding some warmth to the cold winter. Muyang saw this and felt warmth in his heart. The smile on his face deepened. Are you studying? Muyang walked up and asked with a smile. The child named Mu Lai put away his book and stood up. He respectfully said, Father. Muyang lovingly patted Mu Lai's head and said with a smile, Teacher assigns a lot of homework. I know you work hard, but you can't be too tired. A trace of embarrassment and shyness flashed across Mu Lai's small face, but there was more joy. He nodded and said, I'm not tired. Thank you for your concern. Muyang only felt that his son was very sensible and felt comforted. Good child. Muyang truly loved his son who had been missing for 6 years. Because she felt guilty, she wasn't very strict with him. Muyang looked at Yaoji, who was sitting on the side and watching the two indifferently. He smiled softly and said, "What are you doing in the afternoon? If you're bored you can go out for a walk." Yaoji shook her head and said, "There's nothing to see. I'll just accompany Lai in the courtyard. If I go out it'll be a disaster." A trace of guilt flashed across Mu Yang's face. He knew that she did not come back willingly. If it wasn't for her son she would never have come back. Mu Yang felt a sharp pain in his heart when he thought of the haggard Yaoji carrying the seriously ill Mu Lai in front of him a few months ago. So even though Yaoji was always indifferent to him he still felt very satisfied. As long as the mother and son were by his side, everything would be perfect. Yaoji looked at him in a daze and lowered her eyes. "You seem to be busy these days?" Mu Yang smiled and said, "I've been busy these days. I haven't eaten with you and Lai for 2 days." It was rare for Yaoji to ask about him. Mu Yang only thought that she was concerned about him and his smile deepened. He casually told Yaoji about these days. "You also know that the court is very chaotic these days. Our family was loyal to the emperor but now that the emperor was seriously ill, it was still unknown who would win the battle between the Lu family and Li Wang. At this time if they chose to stand on a side it would be good if they won, but if they lost they would be doomed eternally. These days Prince Li's men and Lu clan's men had been trying their best to rope in Marquis Muyang. Although Marquis Muyang had yet to react he probably wouldn't be able to hold on for long. At this time not many people could choose to stay out of this. It was not that they did not want to but that they could not. "A few days ago I heard that General Leng was trapped in the Purple Thorns Pass. Is it because the people of the northern region have already retreated?" Yaoji asked carelessly. Mu Yang smiled bitterly and said, "The people of the northern region came prepared. They have a strong army and strong horses. How can they retreat so easily? General Leng is barely holding on." While they were talking Mu Yang suddenly stopped and pondered. Yaoji didn't look at him. She casually leaned against the window and said, "The enemy is about to reach the city. I don't know what else these people can do. Are they fighting to be the ruler of the fallen country?" Mu Yang smiled bitterly and looked at Yaoji saying, "You can't talk nonsense." But he knew Yaoji's temperament and couldn't bear to lightly blame her. At the same time he agreed with Yaoji's words. The battle at the Purple Thorns Pass was dangerous, but Prince Li and Lu clan only cared about fighting for power. Once the Purple Thorns Pass was broken, it would be a flat land from the north to the capital. In less than 2 days the Northern Jin army would reach the city. If at this time the Mu clan was guarding the border like the Lung clan, they might be able to get out of this battle. As long as the Purple Thorns Pass was defended, the Mu clan would be the hero who won in the future. Thinking of this Mu Yang couldn't wait. He said softly to Yaoji and Mu Lai, "I still have something to deal with. I won't accompany you for dinner tonight. I'll come to see you tomorrow." Then he turned and walked out. Behind him Mu Lai said respectfully, "Father, take care." After sending Mu Yang away, the well-behaved Mu Lai looked up at Yaoji who was sitting by the window and frowned. "Don't tell me you still like this man? He's far worse than Commander Qin." Yaoji was stunned. She patted his head and said, "You're just a kid. What do you know about liking or not?" Mu Yang curled his lips and frowned. He showed a mocking expression and said, "Of course I know. He obviously has a wife but he still shows deep affection for you. But when his wife and mother bully you he can't help. He only knows how to curry favor with them afterwards. He can't even control his wife and protect the person he likes. If he's not a good-for-nothing what is he?" Yaoji looked at him in surprise and said, "Are you really only 7 years old?" Mu Yang rolled his eyes and said, "I'm already 11 years old. Don't you know? He just didn't grow tall because he practiced martial arts too early. But the doctor had said that he would start to grow crazily when he was 14 or 15 years old. It wouldn't affect his height when he grew up." Yaoji was speechless. 11 years old was still a kid. Looking at the kid who was staring at her with a serious face, Yaoji smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry. I know what to do and what not to do. Prince Ding and Princess Consort gave me a new lease of life. I won't ruin their plans." Mu Lai nodded with satisfaction and said, "That's more like it. Don't worry, I'll make sure you go back to see your son safely." Yaoji couldn't help but smile and said, "Thank you very much." Mu Lai snorted and turned his face away uncomfortably. Yaoji looked back out the window with a faint smile on her lips. She and Mu Yang had cut off all ties as early as when she took her child and fled the Chu capital. In the future, They would just serve different masters. Mu Yang's actions were indeed fast. She didn't know how Marquis Mu Yang persuaded the Lu family and Prince Li's people. 3 days later, Mu Yang took 200,000 men and provisions and set off for Zijing Pass. Before he left, Mu Yang turned back and saw Yaoji holding Mu Lai's hand and watching him leave. Looking at the faint smile on Yaoji's lips, Mu Yang's heart suddenly skipped a beat for some reason. A faint uneasiness spread in his heart. When he looked again, he couldn't see Yaoji's face clearly. He only saw her standing in his direction, and Mu Lai even raised his small hand and waved at him. Mu Yang shook his head and smiled faintly in his heart. He was thinking too much when he was about to go to war. A few days later, a group of men and horses escorted a carriage into the capital. The carriage stopped at the busiest inn in the capital. The neatly arranged guards of nearly 30 people couldn't help but raise their eyebrows. The curtain of the carriage was lifted and a white-clothed figure came out and landed lightly on the ground. The passers-by couldn't help but gasp in surprise. It was the end of the first month. It wasn't even the beginning of spring in the Chu capital. It was so cold that people couldn't help but shiver. This man was dressed in a white silk robe. He looked confident and elegant, as if he couldn't feel the cold at all. But the most eye-catching thing was his long silver hair. There was only one person in the world with silver hair and such elegance. The people who were secretly guessing only felt their hearts pounding. It was just that Prince Ding was disfigured in his early years and didn't go out. Not many people in the capital knew what he looked like. Therefore, suspicion could only remain suspicion. After the man got out of the carriage, he turned around and stretched out his hand. The person who came out was a beautiful woman wearing an autumn-colored cloak with white fox edges. The woman was no more than 20 years old. Her bearing and demeanor couldn't be compared to the ladies of the big families in the capital. Just looking at her from afar gave people a feeling of elegance and magnanimity. Before the people had time to marvel at this pair of beauties, another small head popped out of the carriage. A 5- or 6-year-old boy wearing a black brocade robe came out of the carriage. His collar and sleeves were inlaid with white fox edges, which contrasted with the black brocade robe. The child's white and tender little face was even more adorable and moving. The little boy gave the woman an innocent and cute smile. Even the people watching from afar couldn't help but feel their hearts itch. They wished that this cute and obedient child was their own. Seeing Mo Xiaobao reaching out his little hand to ask for a hug, Mo Xiaoyao stopped Yi Li's hand from reaching out and lightly said, "Be careful not to catch a cold." He reached out and hugged Mo Xiaobao tightly in his arms. That action definitely couldn't be called gentle. Mo Xiaobao uncomfortably twisted his body and received a pat from Mo Xiaoyao on the butt. Mo Xiaobao obediently laid in Mo Xiaoyao's arms. Father was the most annoying. It was not comfortable to hug him. Yi Li gave a faint smile and said, "How can it be that cold?" Although her internal strength wasn't as strong as Mo Xiaoyao's and she didn't need to wear too many clothes in the winter, Yi Li believed that she was more resistant to the cold than normal people. Moreover, it wasn't that cold in the northwest, so the capital couldn't be colder than the northwest. With such a large entourage outside, the innkeeper naturally came out to welcome them. With a glance, he could tell that this group of guests were rich and noble. Although he was curious about Mo Xiaoyao's white hair, he still politely led them into the inn. He didn't dare to ask the guests to register at the counter. The innkeeper said as he walked, "Young master and madam, this way please. This small inn has 2 high-quality courtyards. I wonder if young master and madam will be staying in the small courtyard or in this kind of first-class inn. Other than the heaven, earth and mortal rooms, there was a separate courtyard that was even better than the heaven rooms. The price was naturally more than 10 times more expensive than the heaven rooms. There were maids and servants inside. Mo Xiaoyao lightly said, "I want both courtyards." The innkeeper was overjoyed and his smile became even more eager. He quickly said, "Yes, yes, yes. Young master and madam, this way please. I wonder what young master's surname is so this one can register for young master." Mo Xiaoyao stopped and looked at him lightly. Mo Xiaoyao. Young master Mo, that's a good surname. Mo. The innkeeper, who was about to say a few more words with a wide smile, suddenly realized that Mo Xiaoyao's name was quite unique. As a result, he slipped and fell to the ground. He raised his head to look at the tall white-haired man in front of him and cried out, "Your Highness Prince Ding?" Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said, "That's I." Chapter 577. In the inn, the innkeeper forced himself to lead Mo Xiaoyao and the others into the guest courtyard. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he fell to the ground. His legs were weak and he couldn't get up. If it was in the past, being able to receive Prince Ding's family was naturally his inn's supreme honor. But now, when he thought of the relationship between Prince Ding and the imperial family, he couldn't help but tremble. He didn't know if it was a blessing or a curse. But looking at the two indifferent guards guarding the courtyard door, the innkeeper didn't have the guts to inform them. His heart trembled, but he still got up from the ground and went back to the front with a sad face. In the end, Mo Xiaoyao and the others appeared at the entrance of the inn and were seen by so many people passing by. In less than half a day, the news that Prince Ding had returned to the capital and was staying at the most luxurious inn in the capital had spread throughout the capital. Naturally, it also spread to the mansions of the nobles and the imperial palace. As for how many people were sad and happy and how many people were so scared that they dropped the things in their hands, outsiders didn't know. Just as everyone was panicking and having their own thoughts, in the elegant courtyard behind the inn, Leng Haoyu was complaining to Mo Xiaoyao with a bitter face. Prince, even if you want to return to the capital, you don't have to be so high profile. Even if you want to be high profile, you don't have to stay at the inn. It's inconvenient for us to go in and out. He was different from Feng San, who openly showed that he was from the Prince Ding mansion. Even if he didn't get along with his family, he was still the second young master of the Leng family. He was just a businessman who had some friendship with Prince Ding because of his relationship with Feng San. In addition, second Madame Leng and Princess Ding were close friends before they were married. Even so, there was no reason for them to visit Prince Ding as soon as he returned to the capital. So poor second young Master Ling, who was already over 30 years old, still had to bring his wife and daughter over the wall. Yili and Murong Ting sat on the side. Hearing Leng Haoyu's complaints, they couldn't help but look at each other and smile. Although they hadn't seen each other for several years, their feelings for each other hadn't changed at all. The two of them sat on the side and chatted softly while watching the two children playing at the side. Leng Haoyu and Murong Ting's son was 2 years younger than little treasure Mo and was named Leng Junhan. The 3-year-old child looked very similar to Leng Haoyu. At such a young age, one could tell that he was somewhat handsome. However, compared to Mo Xiaobao's mischievous personality, Leng Junhan was more like an obedient and soft little bun. The little bun Leng Junhan seemed to hit it off with Xiaobao Mo. She ran around behind Xiaobao without hesitation, calling him brother. He was so well behaved. However, this kind of affinity was clearly one-sided. Xiaobao's eyes grew on the top of his head. Looking at this little bun who was hugged by his mother the moment they met, he was extremely displeased. He glared at her with his big round eyes, but Leng Junhan took it as a sign of intimacy. Brother, let's play together. Leng Junhan grew up alone and didn't have many friends to play with. Therefore, she was naturally very happy to see this very good-looking brother. Mo Xiaobao rolled his eyes. Who would want to play with a silly little fool? He was even more stupid than his second uncle Su Jirei. This prince won't play with a little kid who doesn't know anything. Mo Xiaobao. Yili gave him a warning look. Mo Xiaobao was most afraid of his mother being angry, so he could only hold out his hand for Leng Junhan to hold and said proudly, "Okay, this prince reluctantly agrees to play with you. Brother Xiaobao is the best. Play with Junhan." Leng Junhan held Mo Xiaobao's hand happily. The word brother Xiaobao immediately made Mo Xiaobao's face darken. He reached out a hand and pinched Leng Junhan's little cheek. "This prince is called Mo Yuchen. I reluctantly agree to you calling me brother Yuchen." Leng Junhan was at a loss. A 3-year-old child hadn't reached the point where he could understand whether the name was pleasant or not. It was obviously brother Xiaobao. Brother Xiaobao. Leng Haoyu on the side couldn't stand Mo Xiaobao bullying his son. He raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Oh Prince Xiaobao, please take care of my Junhan." Mo Xiaobao's white and tender face suddenly turned red. He pointed at Leng Haoyu tremblingly for a while, then he stomped his feet and let go of Leng Junhan and ran away in tears. Leng Junhan, who was left behind, felt wronged. "Brother Xiaobao, don't call me Xiaobao." Mo Xiaobao's roar came from afar. Unfortunately, Leng Junhan, who was busy chasing after Brother Xiaobao, didn't hear it. "Brother Xiaobao, wait for me." Seeing Leng Junhan chasing after Mo Xiaobao with her short legs, Murong Ting hurriedly called the nanny to follow and asked worriedly, "Is the little prince okay?" Yili understood her son's temperament and said with a smile, "Let him be. He'll be fine after a while." Leng Haoyu waved his folding fan and asked knowingly, "What's wrong with the little prince? I just called him Prince Xiaobao. He shouldn't have such a big reaction, right? He should be used to being called that in Glass City." Yili said with a smile, "It's nothing. He probably thinks that everyone in the world knows that his nickname is Emo Xiaobao. He found a place to hide and be sad." Hearing this, Murongting finally couldn't help but laugh out loud. Chapter 578. Emo Shuyao raised an eyebrow. Leng Haoyu said with a smile, "Originally, I didn't know what was going on either. However, I received news a few days ago that Emo Jingli kicked his only son on the first day he became regent." Everyone present was smart. Leng Haoyu's slight hint was enough to understand the crux of the matter. The child in the Li Palace isn't Emo Jingli's. Emo Jingli's son has been hidden? Emo Shuyao said slowly. After thinking for a moment he continued, "Emo Jingli doesn't seem like someone who would give up the throne for a child. The only possibility is that is his only son. Speaking of which, other than Yi Ying, Emo Jingli hasn't had another child in all these years." Emo Jingli and Emo Shuyao were not the same. Emo Shuyao only had Yi Li as his wife. However, Emo Jingli's palace was filled with Wang Fei, secondary concubines and Tong Feng. This way it was strange that there was only one child in all these years. There wasn't even anyone who was pregnant. Most likely Emo Jingqi had done something to it. Murongting was speechless as she said, "These two brothers are really strange." Although no one said anything, they all agreed with her point of view. Wasn't it strange? The two brothers had fought openly and covertly for so many years. Emo Jingqi had been poisoned by Emo Jingli to the point that he couldn't turn over a new leaf. However, Emo Jingli had almost lost his family line because of Emo Jingqi. Neither of them had gained an advantage. Speaking of Emo Jingqi and his brother, Leng Haoyu said worriedly, "Emo Jingqi and Emo Jingli must already know that the prince has returned to the capital. Do the prince and Wang Fei want to move to another place? The inn isn't safe." Emo Shuyao waved his hand and said indifferently, "It doesn't matter. At this time none of them will act rashly." Just as they were talking, Zhuojing came in from outside and reported, Princess, Prince Li is outside asking for an audience." Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and said calmly, "He came quickly." Xiaobao angrily rushed out of the small courtyard and ran outside. This was a courtyard with two entrances and there were guards both inside and outside. Although Emo Xiaobao was occasionally mischievous, he still had a sense of propriety. Of course, he knew that Chu Capital didn't need Glass City to let him do whatever he wanted. Therefore, no matter how angry he was, he wouldn't run outside. He would just sit under a big tree in the outer courtyard and grieve silently. Emo Xiaobao, whose nickname was publicized, felt that he had lost face. He pondered for a long time and finally decided. He also wanted to publicize his father's nickname. As for his father's nickname, Emo Xiaobao had not considered it. "Brother Xiaobao." Leng Junhan's voice came from afar. Obviously, little Junhan was still persistently looking for his new friend. Emo Jingli came out and said, "Prince Li, Prince's consort invites you." Emo Jingli snorted lightly and stepped inside. Emo Shuyao and Yi Li were playing chess in the courtyard. Leng Haoyu and Mu Rongting naturally avoided them. Seeing Emo Jingli come in, Emo Shuyao didn't plan to get up to greet the guest. He glanced at him and said lightly, "What's the matter?" A trace of anger flashed across Emo Jingli's face. In front of Emo Shuyao he seemed to always be inferior to him. In the past, Emo Shuyao was the second young master of the Prince Ding mansion. He was a prince, but he wasn't as favored as him. He wasn't as proud as him. He wasn't as arrogant as him. When he grew up he was conferred the title of Prince Li. He didn't have his military achievements and talents. Now he was the regent of Dechu State. In front of Emo Shuyao he was still inferior to him. How could Emo Jingli be calm? "How dare you? You actually dare to come back?" Emo Jingli said coldly. Emo Shuyao casually threw down a chess piece and leaned against the chair with a faint smile. "I'm back. What do you dare to do?" Emo Jingli gritted his teeth. What did he dare to do? He didn't dare to do anything. Now that Beijing had invaded, the northern tribes and Xiling were eyeing them covetously. Even if Emo Shuyao came back alone, he didn't dare to do anything to him. Once something happened to Emo Shuyao, the Mahist army would definitely come out in full force to avenge him. At that time, the Shilling and northern tribes would invade together. The Chu state would be surrounded by enemies on all sides. It wouldn't take long for them to swallow it whole. Snorting, seeing that Emo Xiuyao had no intention of inviting him to sit, Emo Jingli walked to the empty chair on the side and sat down. He stared at Emo Xiuyao and said, "You came back at this time. What exactly are you plotting?" Emo Xiuyao snorted at his vigilance. "Plotting? Isn't that what you and Emo Jingqi are good at? How about it? Did you give Emo Jingqi enough medicine? If not, I still have some here." Emo Jingli's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and said, "You don't know? When you were buying medicine from that old woman in the Holy Land of Nanjiang, I and Lily happened to be watching. So we took some back for Mr. Shen to research. Do you think, in half a year Mr. Shen will be able to develop an antidote?" Emo Jingli glanced at Yili, who was calmly drinking tea, and suddenly felt inexplicably ashamed. But the meaning in Emo Xiuyao's words made him even more uneasy. "You have an antidote?" Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Did I say that? Emo Xiuyao?" Emo Jingli was so angry that he wanted to throw the teacup in his hand at Emo Xiuyao's face. In the past few years his status and power had gradually risen and he was rarely so irritable. But it seemed that a few casual words from Emo Xiuyao could make him fly into a rage like he did when he was young. "Emo Xiuyao, what do you want?" Emo Xiuyao leisurely drank his tea, calmly saying, "Calm down. Since you're already the regent, then act like one. Don't tarnish the reputation of the regent." His father had also been the regent in the past. Seeing Emo Jingli trying to suppress his anger, Emo Xiuyao said, "I don't want to do anything. I just heard that Emo Jingqi is about to die, so I came back to say goodbye." "You mean that you won't leave until Emo Jingqi dies?" Emo Jingli gritted his teeth. Right now Chujing was in a mess and they didn't need Prince Ding to mess things up. If Emo Jingqi didn't die in half a year, then wouldn't he have to stay in Chujing for half a year? Prince Li's uncle and big brother are both prodigies at governing a country. The Northwest is just a small piece of land, it won't be a problem for them. "Prince I doesn't need to worry about me," Emo Xiuyao said. "I'm worried about you." Emo Jingli couldn't help but curse in his mind. What did the Northwest have to do with him? Right now he just wanted to see Emo Xiuyao get kicked out of Chujing. Emo Xiuyao leaned back in his chair, one hand supporting his forehead as he looked at him. "Don't think about how to get I to leave quickly. I don't have a hobby of coming and going. I will naturally leave when I'm happy. But don't worry, I definitely won't interfere in the battle between you and Emo Jingqi or the Lu family." Emo Jingli sneered, "You think I'll believe your words?" Emo Xiuyao spread his hands. "What else can you do besides believe me?" Chapter 579. Yili sat at the side, leisurely sipping her tea as she watched the two argue back and forth. It was clear that not only could Emo Jingli not compare to Emo Xiuyao in terms of martial arts, but he also couldn't win against Emo Xiuyao in terms of words. In the past many people had told Yili about how arrogant Emo Xiuyao was when he was young. However, the Emo Xiuyao that Yili saw, especially the over 30-year-old Emo Xiuyao, most of the time was still calm and collected. Only now, Yili could see a trace of arrogance in Emo Xiuyao's calm and relaxed demeanor. No wonder Emo Jingli was so angry that his face turned black. Emo Jingli took a deep breath and stared at Emo Xiuyao. "Fine, I believe your words. I won't interfere with your matters in Jing City, but you better not do anything unnecessary." Emo Xiuyao looked up with disdain. "Do you think that the little things you and Emo Jingqi play are very attractive? If I watch too much I will be worried that it will hurt my brain." Emo Jingli didn't argue with Emo Xiuyao. He knew that he couldn't win against Emo Xiuyao. Since he had received Emo Xiuyao's promise, he naturally didn't want to stay here and be bullied. He stood up and glanced at Yili, then turned and walked out of the courtyard. "Li, look at him, he can't even win against I in an argument. Don't you think that marrying me back then was the best arrangement you could have made? It's like a match made in heaven, right?" Ignoring the fact that Emo Jingli hadn't walked out of the courtyard, Emo Xiuyao crossed the chessboard and grabbed Yili's hand, feeling pleased with himself. Yili looked helplessly at Emo Jingli, who stumbled and walked faster after hearing a certain person's shameless boasting. "Is it something to be proud of?" Emo Xiuyao nodded and said proudly, "Of course, I have to let Li know that your husband is 100 times better than others in every aspect, including arguing. Yili rubbed her head and thought for a bit. She looked sincerely at the man opposite her and said, if you want to argue, you shouldn't look for Mo Jingli. He has no fighting ability at all. Then who should I look for? Mo Shuyao squinted as he asked. She's old Master Wang's wife from Glass City's Nanyuan Street. Yili smiled. Mo Shuyao was confused. Who was that? Yili said with a smile. Madame Wang is known as Li City's fastest talker, the #1 shrew. It's said that she once scolded 3 grown men on the street until they cried. Why don't Prince give it a try when we go back? Mo Shuyao was stupefied. After a moment of silence, he raised his head and said with a raised eyebrow, does she dare to argue with I? Yili was speechless. Indeed, no matter how powerful Madame Wang was, she would still be mute in front of Prince Ding. Seeing this, Prince Ding smiled proudly. Look at Li Li. Those who are more powerful than I can't argue with I. Those who are more powerful than I can't argue with I. Your husband is still the most powerful one. Yili covered her face and admitted defeat to a certain person's shamelessness. Of course, Mo Jingli was not the only one who knew about Prince Ding's return to the capital. It was just that he was one step faster as the regent and lived outside the palace. Less than 2 hours after Mo Jingli left, Prime Minister Liu also came to ask for an audience. Unfortunately, he was told that the prince had left with the princess and the Shitsi. The Prince Ding mansion's ancestral tablets were all enshrined in the family temple outside the city, Wuyu Nunnery. Although Mo Jingqi ordered people to seal the Prince Ding mansion, he did not dare to easily let people touch Wuyu Nunnery and disturb the ancestral tablets of the Prince Ding. There were still people taking care of Wuyu Nunnery. Some citizens of the capital would even go to the outer hall of Wuyu Nunnery to burn incense. Therefore, even if the Prince Ding mansion did not have an owner, there was never a lack of incense in front of the ancestral tablets. Seeing that Prince Ding and his group came to pay their respects, the soldiers guarding here naturally did not dare to stop them and respectfully let them in. The two left the guards outside and brought Mo Xiaobao into the innermost inner hall. The ancestral hall in the inner hall enshrined the Prince Ding mansion's ancestral tablets. The tablet at the top was naturally the first-generation Prince Ding Mo Lanyun. And at the bottom was Mo Xiaoyao's father and elder brother, Mo Lufeng and Mo Xiaowen. Without needing the two to teach him, Mo Xiaobao respectfully went forward to burn incense and kowtow to the ancestors. After paying their respects to the ancestors, the family of 3 had just walked out of Wuyu Nunnery when they encountered a large group of people. Standing beside Mo Shuyao, Yili raised her eyebrows and said, there are still people coming to pay their respects to the ancestors of the Prince Ding mansion at this time? Ever since the Prince Ding mansion and the Dechu state broke off relations, other than the commoners, most of the nobles who came to pay their respects came and went quietly. It was rare to see such a grand scene. Mo Shuyao frowned and said indifferently, they came from the palace. Block them and send them back. In the end, the order to stop them was naturally given to the imperial bodyguards. At this time, everyone was well aware of who could come out of the palace. If they were not sincere in paying their respects, the Prince Ding mansion would not need these incense sticks. After receiving the order, a few guards went forward and blocked the path of the large group of people before they reached the bottom of the stairs. These people were indeed from the palace. Naturally, they were all proud and arrogant. Seeing the 2 people who suddenly blocked the path, someone immediately went forward and asked sternly, impudent. Do you know who is in the palanquin? How dare you block the way? The guards of the Prince Ding mansion were even more arrogant than them. They smiled coldly and said, we don't know who is in there. Dismount from the palanquin in front of Wuyu Nunnery. Those who dare to carry the palanquin to the bottom of the stairs. The Prince Ding mansion does not need you to pay your respects. Please go back the way you came. How dare you? How dare you be so rude in front of the noble consort? Take them down. Wait. A cold female voice came out from the graceful and gorgeous palanquin. The curtain was lifted up. Noble consort Liu, dressed in white, walked out of the palanquin with the help of a palace maid. The eunuch who was flaunting his power outside quickly went forward and said with a flattering smile, please forgive me, noble consort. These 2 unruly people have eyes but don't recognize Mount Tai. They are blocking your way. I will ask someone to take them down. Noble consort Liu frowned and said coldly, leave. The eunuch's flattery was ignored by the sound of horse hooves. He had no choice but to leave. Noble consort Lu strolled to the front of the two guards and asked, "Is Prince Ding here?" The guards didn't answer. They only said, "Noble consort, please go back." Noble consort Lu frowned and said, "I just want to pay my respects to the former kings of the Prince Ding mansion." The two guards were silent. Their refusal was obvious. They only needed to carry out the prince's order. They didn't need to know the reason why she came here. Noble consort Lu had been a noble since she was a child. She had been a noble consort for more than 10 years. She was used to being obeyed by others. Seeing the two guards being so stubborn, a trace of anger flashed across her face. But she still held it back and said, "Go and tell Prince Ding that I have something to discuss with him." The two guards looked at each other and said in a distant but polite tone, "The prince and the princess have returned to the capital." The prince left a message. "Since you don't really want to pay your respects, you don't need to disturb the peace of our ancestors." Noble consort Lu's face darkened. Her expressionless face covered the awkwardness of that moment. Originally, she didn't really want to pay her respects to the ancestors of the Prince Ding mansion. She just heard that Prince Ding had left the city. She guessed that he would bring his child to pay his respects to the ancestors. So she hurried over. She didn't expect that Emo Xiuyao would send people to stop her here. Noble consort Lu felt embarrassed. Chapter 580. After a long while, noble consort Lu calms down. She frowns and says, "In that case, I will go back to the city to see Prince Ding." "Thank you. Please go back." The guard salutes her. Sitting back in the sedan, noble consort Lu's face is gloomy. Her face is so cold that it seems to freeze. She knows Emo Xiuyao is inside, but he doesn't want to come out to see her. Thinking of this, there is a trace of resentment in her eyes. Does he hate me so much that he won't even come out to see me? Noble consort Lu's well-maintained fingers tightly hold the silk in her hand. Her eyes flash with determination. "Emo Xiuyao, you will become mine one day." Yi Li's mood is ruined by noble consort Lu's sudden appearance. She is not in the mood to play anymore. Of course, she knew that noble consort Lu had an ulterior motive for coming here to worship at this time with great fanfare. Now Yi Li is sure that the person she hates the most in her life is noble consort Lu. Even Emo Jingqi, Emo Jingli, Lei Jinting and Su Zuidi are not as annoying as this woman. Su Zuidi is narcissistic, selfish and shameless at most. This noble consort Lu doesn't know what face is at all. Su Zuidi thinks that Emo Xiuyao still loves her, so she confidently pesters him. This noble consort Lu knows that Emo Xiuyao has no feelings for her, but she still believes that only she is worthy of Emo Xiuyao. She and Emo Xiuyao are a perfect match. She has to be strong enough to deal with perverts. "Li, I am wronged." Looking at his beloved wife's gloomy face, Prince Ding has to complain carefully. In the past, he only thought that Li doesn't get jealous, which makes him very unhappy. He thought that Li doesn't love him enough. However, when Ali's expression really turned ugly, he couldn't help but want to carefully apologize and make her happy. He wished that Ali would never be jealous in this lifetime. Too much jealousy is not good for health. Yi Li looks back at him. Emo Xiuyao quickly says, "That woman came here herself. I've already told her a long time ago that I only have one wife and that's Lily. Who knows why she doesn't understand human language?" Yi Li smiled faintly. "Isn't it because our Prince Ding's charm is outstanding?" Emo Xiuyao was pleasantly surprised. "Ali also thinks that this prince's charm is outstanding?" Yi Li nodded and said seriously, "Of course. Su Zuidi, Princess Lingyun, noble consort Lu. Although there weren't many of them, they were still the top two beauties in Great Chu and Western Hill. Their quality was definitely excellent. Compared to the so-called handsome men, Prince Ding's charm is nothing, right?" Emo Xiuyao is suddenly depressed. Li is still angry. Li husband understands. "In the future, if anyone dares to look at husband, I will dig out their eyes." Yi Li raises her eyebrows, asking curiously, "Why not ruin your face? Isn't that the reason?" Emo Xiuyao sternly refuses. "If husband's face is ruined again, wife won't be pleased to see me." Emo Xiaobao pokes his head out from his father's embrace, blinking his eyes. "Father, don't worry about ruining it. This child will definitely grow up to be an earth-shattering handsome man. Mother, just look at me." Emo Xiuyao angrily shoves his son back into his embrace. "Don't use words like that. When you go back, write earth-shattering 500 times for me. Emo Xiaobao wiggles his little butt in his father's embrace, groaning, Mother, Father 7-5. Back in the city after Prince Li's visit to the inn, the imperial consort in the palace rushed out of the capital. Now everyone in the capital knew that Prince Ding and his wife had brought the little heir back. The moment they entered the city gates, they attracted countless gazes. But because of the relationship between the Prince Ding mansion and the imperial family, the commoners didn't dare to go up and say anything. But from their expressions one could see the excitement in their eyes. Although the important figures in the imperial court were focused on fighting for power, there were still many commoners who remembered that there was a war going on a few hundred li away. Emo Xiaobao stood up from Emo Xiaoyao's embrace, curiously looking at the surrounding streets. It wasn't rare for people to gather around like this in Li City, so Emo Xiaobao didn't feel any stage fright. In fact, the more you look at this young master, the happier you'll be. Nestled in Emo Xiaoyao's embrace, he poked his head out and smiled brightly at the pedestrians, instantly causing them to fall over. The little heir is so cute. As expected of Prince Ding and Princess Ding's child, he's so adorable. He's so brave at such a young age, no wonder he's the descendant of the Prince Ding mansion. The Prince Ding mansion has a successor. These praises naturally entered Emo Xiaobao's ears, so Emo Xiaobao became even more spirited. Yili walked beside Emo Xiaoyao, looking at her excited son. She raised her brows and said to Emo Xiaoyao, "Others said that Prince was flamboyant when he was young, but I didn't believe it. Now I finally believe it." She pointed at Emo Xiaobao in amusement. "He's so flamboyant at such a young age, what will happen in a few years?" Emo Xiaobao pouted and defended himself. "Mother, this child is doing this for father's face. Didn't people say that a tiger father wouldn't beget a dog son? Father is so mighty, if son is like little Daileng, wouldn't it be father's face?" Emo Xiaoyao looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, "I don't know when Ai's face is so important in your eyes." Emo Xiaobao laughed foolishly. Yili raised her hand and flicked his forehead, saying, "Little Junhan is much more obedient than you. Be careful, your Uncle Leng will punish you if he hears your words." Emo Xiaobao hid in his father's arms, touched his forehead that was flicked and muttered, "I didn't say anything wrong, Uncle Leng won't dare to punish me. If he was soft and silly like little Daileng, he would be bullied to death by his father. Little Daileng should be glad that he became the child of Uncle Leng and not the child of the Prince Ding mansion." Touching his forehead and looking at the sky, Missouri Xiaobao deeply felt that his life was great. Yili looked strangely at her son, who was looking at the sky, looking like a little old man, and asked curiously, "What are you thinking about?" Her son always liked to think about strange things. Sometimes it made his parents not know whether to laugh or cry. Emo Xiaoyao quietly pinched Emo Xiaobao's butt, smiled and said, "Are you hungry? Look at his big soulless eyes. You didn't eat much for lunch." Emo Xiaobao angrily glared, "You're the one with big eyes. You're the rice bucket, you're the rice bucket." Emo Xiaoyao smiled. "You think I don't know that you're thinking about Ai's bad words?" A family of three, a tall and handsome white-haired man was holding a jade-like boy in black, and beside him was a beautiful woman wearing a light-colored cloak. They walked slowly along the street, talking as they walked, with a faint smile on their faces. This warm and quiet scene made many people stunned, and even one or two acquaintances who wanted to go up and say hello were a little embarrassed to disturb them. People quietly watched the two stroll, and the originally noisy street seemed to be quiet. In a tea house on the street, noble consort Lu stood quietly by the open window, wearing a white robe and a snow fox cloak. She looked down at the man and woman walking slowly from afar, and her tightly clenched hands were scratched by her fingernails. What a beautiful couple. And Prince Ding, when he grows up, he'll definitely be more handsome than Prince Ding. Behind noble consort Lu, Tan Jiji said with a faint smile. Noble consort Lu suddenly turned around and coldly glanced at Tan Jiji. Tan Jiji didn't care, shrugged and didn't say anything. Seeing that he didn't say anything, noble consort Lu turned around and looked at the white-haired man. Thinking about why his hair was white, noble consort Lu's heart was filled with resentment. At that time, if she had known that Yili could win Emo Xiaoyao's heart, she would never have let Yili stay by his side. Unfortunately, one wrong step led to many wrong steps. In order to win Emo Xiaoyao's heart, she even helped Yili. Thinking of this, noble consort Lu felt that she had done the stupidest thing in the world. Why didn't he love her? In what way was she inferior to Yili? Noble consort Lu stared at the green-robed woman beside the white-haired man from afar. She was beautiful, but noble consort Lu thought she was much more beautiful than her. In terms of family background, she was the daughter of the prime minister. Yili had a maternal grandfather from the Su family, but that was only a maternal grandfather after all. Strictly speaking, Yili was just the daughter of a commoner. Tan Jiji looked at the woman in front of him with a smile. He was too obsessed with love. What's more, did noble consort Lu really love Mo Xiuyao as much as she thought? She probably didn't want to accept the fact. Think about it, how could a beautiful and proud woman who could even make the emperor fall for her? How could she tolerate a man who didn't have her in his eyes? Send someone to invite Prince Ding and Princess Ding up for a talk. Noble consort Lu said coldly. Tan Jiji frowned. Is that okay? It's not good news for noble consort Lu to leave the palace. Go. Tan Jiji shrugged. If noble consort insists. Downstairs, Yili sensed a pair of resentful eyes staring at her from afar. She looked up and saw the figure of the woman in white standing by the window of the second floor not far away. Noble consort Lu deserved to be the most beautiful woman in the Chu capital after Su Zuidi. She was over 30 years old now, but she was still as beautiful as a snow pear flower. Standing there for a while, she had attracted the attention of many passers-by, but she didn't seem to care. She just looked at the passers-by in a daze. She was like a beautiful white jade sculpture. Greetings, Prince Ding. Greetings, Princess. Noble consort Lu wants to see you. A man who looked like a guard appeared on the street and said respectfully. Mo Xiuyao had a dangerous look in his eyes. He lowered his eyes and said indifferently, Lily must be thirsty. Let's go and have a cup of tea. Yili smiled faintly, okay. Chapter 581. Walking up to the second floor of the tea house, there was not a single guest there. This was not a very high-end tea house, and the furnishings inside were not to the liking of noble consort Lu, who had lived in the palace for a long time. Therefore she chose this place purely to wait for Mo Xiuyao and Qin Wanru. Noble consort Lu naturally could not stay in the same room with so many common people, so this tea house had been emptied long ago. The empty second floor was very quiet. As soon as he stepped on the stairs, he saw noble consort Lu standing facing the window, leaving only a white back. The palace maids and eunuchs around her all bowed their heads, and no one dared to make the slightest sound. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows, carried Xiaobao to an empty table on the side, and saw the little steamed bun put on the table. Xiaobao curled his small mouth. He was not a child, he did not want to sit on the table. He reached out his small hand wanting Yili to hug him. Yili smiled faintly and reached out to take him to the chair on the side to sit down. Only then did Xiaobao happily sit on the big chair, twisting his small butt and blinking his eyes at Yili saying, Nyangqin, didn't that auntie invite us to drink tea? Why did she ignore us? Auntie? Yili's mouth twitched. Don't think that Xiaobao did not know how to speak, he would offend people as soon as he opened his mouth. For someone who had just learned how to speak and knew how to call Qinjing sister and first and second auntie, whether he wanted to make people happy or not depended on his mood. Yili sometimes worried that this son would grow up to be a dissolute playboy, so she agreed to Mo Xiuyao's suggestion, which was rare, to prevent Xiaobao from interacting with Han Mingxi as much as possible. Therefore this time noble consort Lu must have done something to make Xiaobao unhappy. Noble consort Lu turned around and saw the black-clothed child sitting between Yili and Mo Xiuyao, and couldn't help but be surprised. Noble consort Lu flaunted her beauty. Although she did not like Mo Jingqi, she had to admit that Mo Jingqi was a handsome man. However, their children, 2 boys and 1 girl, were not as beautiful as this black-clothed boy in front of her. Noble consort Lu looked at the boy in black who was looking at her eagerly. Even the anger in her heart dissipated a lot. However, she felt even more indignant. Her and Prince Ding's child would definitely be prettier than this child. On the side, Yili looked at the sky speechlessly. Seeing noble consort Lu's absent-minded appearance, she knew that her mind was wandering again. Perhaps he had some unrealistic fantasies in his mind. Auntie? Pretty auntie? Mo Xiaobao believed that he was a person with a good sense of beauty, so even if he did not like the auntie in front of him, he had to admit that she was a very beautiful auntie. It was a pity that there was something wrong with this auntie's brain. Just a moment ago she was still glaring at him angrily. He thought that she was going to get angry, but who knew that she was staring at him in a daze. Young master knows that he is handsome, but auntie is too old, so don't drool at young master. Young master Mo thought narcissistically. Auntie, do you want to treat us to tea or not? Mo Xiaobao asked impatiently. Noble consort Lu was called auntie again and again by a child. Even if she was slow, she knew that the child was doing it on purpose. Even if the child was immature, someone must have ordered him to do it. Noble consort Lu came forward and frowned. Little heir, I am not an auntie. Mo Xiaobao frowned and looked at her for a while. Then he said quietly, my father said that people who are 10 years older than my mother should be called auntie. Although his mother was in her 20s, many people said that his mother looked like a young girl who was not yet 20 years old. The auntie in front of him looked like she was in her 30s. She was as old as his father. It's okay if you don't take good care of yourself. I will introduce you to my mother's skincare products. Mo Xiaobao said with pity. Such a beautiful person became an auntie because she did not know how to take good care of herself. Therefore Mo Xiaobao believed that noble consort Lu was an auntie. Cough cough. Yi Li, who was drinking tea with her head lowered, accidentally choked. Mo Xiuyao raised one eyebrow and looked at his serious son with a faint smile. Why didn't he remember that he had taught him that people who were 10 years older than Yi Li should be called auntie? Little heir is so smart. Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth and said coldly. Miss Yi taught me well. Yi Li's expression was normal. She said with a smile, Noble consort, you are overpraising me. Who praised you? Noble consort Lu felt hatred in her heart. She looked at Yi Li's smiling face and her heart couldn't help but twitch. She always thought that Yi Li was not as beautiful as she was. But now that she looked at Yi Li so closely, she found that Yi Li was not as ordinary as she remembered. Her eyebrows were delicate and graceful. Her smile was gentle, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Under the gentleness between her eyebrows, there was a hint of elegance and nobility. These were two contradictory temperaments, but the woman in front of her had a confidence and majesty that she had never seen before. People couldn't help but remember that this woman was not only a daughter of a famous family, but also a heroine who could ride a horse and fight. This kind of temperament didn't need any external decoration or expression to hide. Even if she smiled so gently like an ordinary woman, people still didn't dare to offend her. Of course, this wasn't what noble consort Lu cared about the most. What made noble consort Lu gnash her teeth in hate was Yi Li's age. Yi Li was old compared to a 14 or 15-year-old girl who was of marriageable age. But compared to noble consort Lu, who was over 30 years old, Yi Li, who was 21 or 22 years old and looked like she was 18 years old, was so young that it made people hate her. No matter how much noble consort Lu didn't want to admit it, she had to admit that she was old compared to Yi Li. Thinking of this, noble consort Lu looked at Mo Xiuyao, who was sitting on the side, with some panic. She saw that Mo Xiuyao was holding a cup of tea in one hand, but he didn't drink it, nor did he look at her. Instead, he fixed his eyes on the woman in blue who was sitting on the other side. Looking at the shallow dimples on Yi Li's lips, the handsome face under the white hair also showed a happy smile. Sitting between such a handsome man and woman was a child who seemed to have all the advantages of the two. This picture was so beautiful that people were addicted, but noble consort Lu suddenly felt cold all over. Xiu. Prince Ding. After thinking for a moment, seeing that Mo Xiuyao didn't want to speak, noble consort Lu had to speak. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and looked at her silently with a questioning look. Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth and said, I have something to talk to Prince Ding alone. Can Miss Yi and the heir leave? Before Yi Li could speak, Mo Xiaobao spoke first. No? No matter how angry noble consort Lu was, she couldn't get angry in front of Mo Xiuyao. She could only force a stiff smile and said, Little heir, I have something to talk to your father about. Why don't you let your mother take you out to play? Mo Xiaobao puckered his little mouth and looked at Mo Xiuyao with eager eyes. His big black and white eyes were instantly filled with tears, and it looked like they were about to drip out. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and looked at his son. What do you want to do? Mo Xiaobao looked at his father pitifully and choked with sobs. Father, do you not want Xiaobao and mother anymore? Xiaobao loves mother and father the most. Father doesn't want Xiaobao anymore. Thus, thanks to noble consort Lu, Mo Xiuyao heard his son say that he loved him for the first time in his life. This kid usually wanted to kick his father as far away as possible. Of course, he also thought the same. Prince Ding, what do you think about the current situation in the capital? Noble consort Lu stared at Emo Xiuyao and asked in a low voice. Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and said, I only came back to worship my ancestors. I don't plan to get involved in the affairs of the capital. Moreover, the Mahist army has no connection with the Dechu state. I don't have a good reason to get involved. Noble consort Lu doesn't need to ask about this. Moreover, this isn't something noble consort Lu should ask about. Shouldn't ask. These 3 words were undoubtedly a huge blow to noble consort Lu, because it meant that Emo Xiuyao still regarded her as an ordinary harem woman. No matter how talented Emo Xiuyao was, he was still a marquis in the ancient imperial era. He definitely didn't think that men and women were equal. But he was different from ordinary men. He believed that some women were as capable as men. Therefore he could accept them learning literature, martial arts, politics and generals. For example, Yili and Princess Anxi. But at the same time he still thought that most women were ordinary women in the boudoir. All they needed to do was to stay in the boudoir. The former represented equal status and respect to him, while the latter represented a man's vassal. Therefore in Emo Xiuyao's eyes, it was natural for Yili to get involved in anything, and noble consort Lu shouldn't get involved in the affairs of the imperial court. Not because she was a harem concubine, but because she wasn't qualified. Noble consort Lu obviously understood Emo Xiuyao's thoughts. Because of this she was even angrier. After a while, noble consort Lu gritted her teeth and said, Prince, you should know that my son has been made the crown prince. Once the emperor passes away, he will become the emperor of the Dechu state, and I will be the empress dowager of the Dechu state. Emo Xiuyao nodded. Of course he knew. But so what? There are plenty of empress dowagers. In the Dechu state alone there were 7 or 8 empress dowagers. So what? So what? The Dechu state had never had an empress dowager who could control the young emperor and stir up trouble in the previous dynasty. It wasn't that they didn't want to. Most women who worked hard all their lives to sit on the empress dowager's throne wanted to govern from behind the curtain. But the Dechu state had the Prince Ding mansion. As long as the Prince Ding mansion was there was no woman in the imperial court who could give orders. Therefore, since the founding of the Dechu state, the empress dowager with the most power was the current empress dowager, Emo Jingqi's birth mother. Even so, she wasn't able to reach the level of power in the imperial harem of previous dynasties. One reason was because Emo Jingqi wasn't young when he ascended the throne, and Emo Jingqi couldn't tolerate the loss of power. 2 was because the officials of the Dechu state weren't used to having power in the imperial harem. Noble consort Lu lowered her eyes. She couldn't argue with Emo Xiuyao. Not only because she loved him, but also because she didn't have any bargaining chips to compete with him. She could only change her tone and say, Prince Ding should know the current situation in the imperial court. Not only did Emo Jingli poison the emperor, but he also forced the emperor to make him the prince regent. Once the emperor passes away as the prince regent, Emo Jingli will definitely rule the world. At that time the Dechu state will become Emo Jingli's world. In this way it won't be good for Prince Ding, right? Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and looked at noble consort Lu without saying anything. Noble consort Lu continued, Prince Ding should know that Prince Li and you have been at odds since you were young. Because of Miss Yi you have a grudge against him for stealing your wife. Once Prince Li has power in his hands he will use the power of the entire country to make things difficult for the Northwest. Prince Ding will have a headache. Emo Xiuyao casually picked up the teacup and took a sip. The bitter taste of the not-so-good tea leaves made him frown. He said calmly, Noble consort Lu, I'm afraid you haven't discussed this with Prime Minister Lu before? The smile on noble consort Lu's face froze. She asked with some confusion, what does Prince Ding mean? Emo Xiuyao said, I said that if noble consort Lu has nothing to do, you should stay in the imperial palace and not interfere with things you don't understand. If you had discussed it with Prime Minister Lu beforehand, he would have told you that no matter if it was your son or Emo Jingli who ascended the throne, they wouldn't be able to do anything. They don't have the ability to make things difficult for I. Noble consort Lu's expression changed slightly. She clenched her fingers tightly and said, Prince Ding is too confident. She didn't believe it. The Northwest was only a small place. In noble consort Lu's eyes, the people of the Dechu state could drown that small place with just a mouthful of saliva. But she forgot how many people of the Dechu state were willing to spit on the Prince Ding mansion for her. However, what you said is not wrong. For the little crown prince ascending the throne is more beneficial than Emo Jingli ascending the throne. Emo Shuyao looked down at the tea in his hand and said lightly. Hearing this, noble consort Lu was delighted. She said with a smile, so Prince Ding agrees to help I? Emo Shuyao looked up and glanced at Yi Li, who was drinking tea silently. He asked, Li, did I agree? Yi Li looked up and said lightly, I didn't hear it. What does Prince Ding mean? Noble consort Lu felt like she was being played. Even if the person playing with her was Emo Shuyao, she still couldn't stand it. But in fact, Emo Shuyao didn't mean to play with her. He looked at her calmly and said, I already promised Emo Jingli that I wouldn't interfere with the affairs of the imperial court. Why? Noble consort Lu asked. At the same time, she was deeply disappointed. She hoped to cooperate with Emo Shuyao. At least she had to let Emo Shuyao see how different she was. Emo Shuyao would definitely realize that she was a better choice than Yi Li. Why? Do you really not care about what you can get by cooperating with me? As long as you help me, the Prince Ding mansion will still be the Prince Ding mansion of the Dechu state. You can become the next Prince Regent. She would even help him if he wanted to become the emperor. Compared to the Empress Dowager, she wanted to be his empress more. Yi Li's eyes twitched. She said lightly, I don't know what I can get by cooperating with noble consort Lu, but at least I can anger Emo Jingqi to death. Prince, right? His favorite concubine, the birth mother of the crown prince, was cooperating with his most hated enemy, the enemy he feared the most. Even if Emo Jingqi didn't die of illness or poison, he would be angered to death, right? I was talking to Prince Ding. Noble consort Lu said coldly. She stared at Yi Li angrily. Yi Li's expression was calm and unhurried as she replied, this consort is also talking to His Highness. I was just giving my opinion on noble consort Lu's proposal for Prince to consider. Prince, right? Emo Shuyao smiled dotingly. He said softly, Miss Li is very thoughtful. I's business is Li's business. There's nothing that can't be said. Besides, I can still anger Emo Jingqi to death even if I don't cooperate with the Lu family. Miss Li, you have to believe in your husband's ability. Is Prince refusing? Noble consort Lu said to Emo Shuyao. She stared fiercely at Yi Li. Emo Shuyao said carelessly, I'm not refusing. I have never considered such a boring and time-wasting proposal.